All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
How can she possibly carry that much sand in her?
The surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. What makes Alyssa Milano's call for a sex strike to protect abortion so ridiculous? Let's say you're pro-choice and you've got a pro-abortion argument that you really find persuasive. Think it'll get pro-lifers to change their position? Try replacing abortion with euthanizing insert human demographic here. If the result of that sounds unreasonable, using it for abortion isn't going to reach pro-lifers. How fast would a woman get banned from Twitter if she tweeted, in all seriousness, about maintaining a sex strike until lawmakers legalize euthanizing schoolchildren who have gotten too fat? It isn't that in the context of the usual pro-abortion positions on when life begins, pro-abortion arguments are wholly irrational. If accepted as true, that underlying assumption that there is some dividing line during gestation before which the gestating organism doesn't constitute a life is a basis for viewing many pro-abortion arguments as perfectly logical. It's that if that underlying premise is rejected, there's no such basis and no such logic. And asserting that society's inability to agree on when life begins justifies erring on the side of it's okay to kill for whatever reason doesn't fly with people who place when life begins at the completion of conception. You can't bargain with people who recognize gestation as a part of life, and pro-lifers do. It's the earliest part, but it's still a part, and not some kind of pre-life limbo. Some base that on religion, but many base it on biology, knowing it's a living human organism, not inanimate, dead, or non-human. We have existing scientific criteria for that, and outside the topic of abortion, it's not under any manner or degree of debate that would justify abortion advocates' classification of a gestating baby as non-living, non-human, or part of the mother's body. Philosophical arguments about personhood aren't persuasive against that, even if they're well-designed. Your pro-life listener is going to consider whether those same arguments would make it okay to terminate the life of the kid next door, and would reject them if they would not. Emotional appeals, like victim signaling on behalf of pregnant women, will not change this. Mercenary arguments about government dependence won't either. Those two categories encompass the vast majority of pro-abortion arguments, and neither one outweighs the seriousness of terminating a human life. It's understandable that pro-abortion advocates will not have considered this because just as their arguments fall flat in the context of pro-lifers' conclusions on life's beginnings, in the context of pro-abortion conclusions, those same arguments are flawless, and pro-lifers' points on ethics and morals would also fall flat. Even at the most rational end of the abortion debate, that gap exists. At the bad voter no nookie end, it's a deep, yawning chasm, and the tantrums of feminist zealots on the topic are ludicrous, embarrassing, and discrediting to their position. Think about it. This woman literally advocated emotional blackmail and appears to have expected the closing of temple vagina to sway people's opinions on an issue that has been vigorously and fiercely debated for a century. From a pro-life perspective, she's using sex to demand permission for women to kill their own children. Sounds quite level-headed and mature, doesn't it? Can you imagine why it didn't work? Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 87. That's not how any of this works. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, and also Accidental Tornado Chaser, if you've seen my Twitter feed. Here with Karen Strawn, she who must be obeyed, and hopefully soon, also Nonsense Annihilator, just Lauren B. She's running a little late, and inevitably, so it'll just be me and Karen at first, and hopefully we'll have Lauren soon after. We're here to finish what we started last week when we began going through our Badger Listicle, Top 10 Things Alyssa Milano Accidentally Said in the Context of Her Call for a Sex Strike by Are Ya Kiddin' Me? Hopefully this doesn't get too loud. Panic by numbers. Actually, it might cut out here and there tonight. I only cut out a little on Tuesday, so hopefully it doesn't do too much. But I've already had some internet problems. Had internet problems right before the show, so it can't be helped. We've got power outages still in some areas, and there was damage to, I think, some of the places that actually provide the services I rely on to broadcast to you guys. So we'll make do with what we've got. In any case, we won't be playing the opening video in one shot as before, aside from my little intro. We'll be playing each of the last 5 points one at a time, so that my co-hosts can respond, and starting with Karen by herself at first, and then again, hopefully, Lauren. But again, it wouldn't be an HBR broadcast without the usual shill, so if you don't know why badgerfeed.com is important, you're already out of the loop. You can fix that by going on over to badgerfeed.com and registering to receive notifications. Do not make me turn this live stream around and broadcast all the way home, guys. And if you want to support our work, even in the midst of all the financial blacklisting and all the other crap that's taking place today to try to shut us down, feedthebadger.com is the most stable way to help us out. So remember, information is power, and we have it. Go to Badger Feed for information, and feed the Badger to help us share that information with everybody else. And speaking of sharing information, don't forget to smash that like button and share us on every social media site you use. Grab some popcorn, throw open the gates of reason, and unleash your friendly neighborhood badgers on Normie Society. It'll be fun, entertaining, and educational. And speaking of educational things, it's time to roll that mean listicle footage. I'm going to switch to another screen, and we will get going. I'm going to have to actually find the right point on it, though, because SciTube doesn't let me do, start at a certain spot with the next video. So
damn them.
We might get to... There, we'll pause that. And we want... I think it was 6 minutes, approximately. There we go.
I can't know, Batman.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, this... I would love a... something exactly like SciTube, except with a few additional features.
Except not SciTube.
Yeah, just all the things that SciTube has, just a couple of things that it doesn't. But there
you
go. That works consistently. That's one of the things that SciTube mostly has, but not all the time. So here we go. And I'm probably gonna blink Lauren out until she gets here. Well, there we go. So everybody can see that she's not answering because she's not here, not because she doesn't have anything to say.
She's not here, damn it.
No.
What the hell is wrong with her?
We miss our Lauren. We have an empty chair. It's already doing it. Voice connected is orange. Don't go red. Okay. Jeez, this is going to happen all night. Here we go. The simplified version of I will withhold A from you until you provide me with B is I will trade you A in exchange for B. If A is sex, is the nature of the transaction really changed by whether B is money or some other resource? So much for feminist opposition to human trafficking of women. They're fine with it when it's under their control and done on their terms.
Oh God, this is so typical of feminists, right? That they, and it really is about like they will go on and on and on and on about how sex shouldn't be seen as transactional, right? Yet when a woman regrets sex, they will portray it as if something like completely fundamental has been stolen from a woman. Something absolutely, just egregiously stolen from her. And they'll wave their vaginas in everybody's face and say, if you want any of this, you're going to have to comply. And even the sort of the virgin shaming that they do, and the I believe it was Barbarossa who said it was an existential genetic threat that feminists. Oh my God. I can hear you. Okay. Well, Barbarossa said ages and ages ago, right? That when feminists essentially say, if with that attitude, with that misogynistic attitude, right, no woman's ever going to have sex with you, no one would want to touch you, right? What they're doing is saying, you're never going to pass on your genes because you don't comply with what we want. You aren't behaving in the way that we demand, and therefore, this is the existential genetic threat that feminists use to force men to comply with what they want. It's really that simple, and yes, it is a transaction if they're saying, I'll withhold this from you until you do that. And then once you do that, then you can have this back. It's a total transaction. It's cold-blooded, and it's all based on something that feminists have always wanted full control over, which is the right of women to have 100% control over their reproduction and reproductivity. That they, this is what led first wave feminists to try to ban condoms, when condoms used to cost, they used to be reusable. You wash them and reuse them. And they would cost about the monthly wage of your average prostitute for one condom. For one, I guess they called them French letters, right? So you would buy one if you were a prostitute, and that's what you would use, and you would wash it and reuse it, and there you go. But then when mass market, mass produced condoms became available, feminists joined with religious fundamentalists, with Christian fundamentalists, to try to bar their sale to men. They essentially said that if condoms are to be sold, they should not be sold to men. They should only be sold to women, because only women should have any kind of say over whether women get pregnant or not, right? And it wasn't so much about preventing pregnancy. It was about being able to decide when you wanted to get pregnant. That's like, because who could object on the grounds of, object to men being able to purchase condoms on the grounds of wanting to prevent pregnancy? Nobody could object to that, right? The man's paying for them, he's using them, and there you go, right? Preventing pregnancy. No, feminists wanted control over when they got pregnant, not over preventing pregnancy, but over when and with whom they got pregnant. Right. And like, this is like one of the most fundamental, it's like a vein running through the entirety of feminism right from the very beginning, is decoupling women's reproductive choice from any kind of influence by men, right? And this is why you see, the doctor whose sperm was saved from oral sex, and then his date impregnated herself. He gets to pay child support. You get the 15-year-old boy who was raped by an adult woman, and she served time for it. He gets to pay child support, right? You get there's no such thing. There's no law anywhere that actually considers it a crime for a woman to lie about birth control. There's no jurisdiction in the world that considers that a crime, even though the man is liable for the consequences. This is really one of maybe their primary endeavor is to put all of the reproductive choice, all of the reproductive power into female hands, and with none of the accountability.
Yeah, that's basically it. And they claim to oppose gender roles. Feminists claim over and over again that all of the problems in society between men and women are caused by gender roles, and everything that is normal about gender roles is supposed to be bad, and everything has to change, and masculinity has to become more feminized, and femininity can't be defined around women's reproduction until it suits feminist needs. And then all of a sudden, yeah, the male protector and provider role is great and vital and must be preserved. And women are completely defined by reproduction. And of course, they have not only no accountability for it, but they're not allowed to have any adversity because of their decisions at all. All of that has to fall on the guy. And so here you have a situation where they're willing to treat it as a transactional thing. Don't do what we say, or no nookie. And it doesn't look like, to them at least, it doesn't look like they're going against what they believe. But in reality, it comes right back down to the male protector provider role and the female mother role, and the female sexual role. And they're never going to get away from that, because really their movement is defined by both. The truth is, it's feminist sexuality and women's sexuality is kind of the primary currency of feminist advocacy. Not necessarily in terms of they'll sleep with you for everything they want, but almost everything they want has something to do with freeing women from sexual accountability and holding men responsible for women's welfare in terms of the results of their sexual choice.
Yeah, their reproductive decisions.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like it's not even sexual choice, right? Because sexual choice, I can choose to have sex with whoever I want. That should be fine. But my choice to my intentional choice to tell my sexual partner that I'm on the pill when I'm not, that is something that is considered to be a sacred thing to be protected by feminists. Right?
Women only, right?
They don't want women to be punished for that. They won't even admit that this is something that women would do, when in reality, I keep getting reminded of this old article from it's called the Scotsman magazine or something like that, and they did a social scruples survey of readers and found that almost half of women said that they would lie about birth control in order to get pregnant regardless of their partner's wishes.
Oh yeah, no, not only that, there are feminists who will admit it. There are feminists I've had conversations on Twitter with feminists who have said, well, it's a woman's right. A man interfering with a woman getting pregnant during a sex act, even with him, is interfering with her reproductive rights. And when
Yeah,
I
I
brought
know.
up, and I've said, a man should have his reproductive rights too. He should have the right to control his sperm. And I've actually had feminists argue that no, they shouldn't. Having sex, in their mind, a man having sex is consent to pregnancy. And if he doesn't want to get her pregnant, he shouldn't have sex. That's his only role and his only recourse.
The law agrees with them, right? Because I mean, in that case with the doctor who, and she was a doctor too, where she preserved the semen from oral sex and impregnated herself with it after he left, and he had made it very, very clear that, you know, we're not actually going to have reproductive sex unless and until we get married, because I'm not going to have kids outside of marriage, right? This was why she had to do this. And he was just, it was even to the point where he wasn't going to use condoms because he knew that they sometimes fail. Right? So he was only going to have sex, you know, oral sex, or the sex that conceives lawyers, which is anal sex, and maybe politicians. But he was only going to do those things because he just did not want to risk having a child outside of wedlock. Right? And she went and did this. The law essentially said that the moment that his semen left his body, it ceased to become his property. And so if he threw it in the trash in a condom, then it ceased to become his property, and it became the property of the person whose trash can it was, or anybody who stumbled across it. Possession, apparently, physical possession is 9/10 of the law in this case. And that because he ejaculated into her mouth, he was giving her his semen, transferring it into her legal possession, at which point she can do with it whatever she wants.
Yeah, I know that case. There's been a couple of cases like that, and actually, I think probably the most egregious ones have been where the man didn't even consent, you know, or the boy didn't. The youngest I've seen, and I found it once, and then when I went back to look at it again, it had been removed. But there was one case in the United States, I believe Tennessee, where an 11-year-old boy was raped by an adult woman. She got pregnant, and he was on the hook for child support. Now, under the law, he cannot get a job, even with parental consent, other than like maybe a paper route, which wouldn't pay, you know, jack shit. But he cannot get a real job without parental consent until he's 15. So 4 years before he's old enough to get a real job, at an age when he cannot get into a PG-13 movie. You know, he's not allowed to hear cuss words in a movie theater. He's not allowed he was not allowed to see mild violence in a movie. You know, Disney was appropriate for that age group, right? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you had to have your parents come watch it with you. I think that actually didn't have a for all audiences rating. And he's on the hook for child support to his rapist, his convicted rapist.
Yeah,
and,
no, it's
and because he's male and she's female, and
this is the law everywhere. If it's your DNA, you are responsible for it, as long as you're a man and she keeps the child, right? But it doesn't give you any right to it, right? Like, this is one of the things that 15-year-old in Kansas, you know, he and his parents had to apply to the court at their own expense, in order to get any parental rights over the child, even visitation rights, because that's not assumed. The only thing that's assumed on the part of the man is responsibility, unless the parties were married. And even then, the rights part of it is awfully shaky. You actually really have to fight hard to protect your rights as a father, even if you were married to the mother. And it's another thing too, right? One of the things that that feminists have they seem to have no interest in changing or altering is the fact that, okay, say a guy is married to a woman and he finds out she's cheating on him. He finds out because she's pregnant and he hasn't had sex with her in months, right? And so he knows the kid isn't his, so he files for divorce. Well, if that divorce isn't final before she has that baby, he's still responsible for it. He's still on the hook for it because it was born within the marriage.
And there are a lot of places where you can't even get a DNA test. Now, in Ohio, and I know this because of the 7 years in hell case, if it's proved that the child born within the marriage is another man's child, that can get you out of child support if you can prove it. And you know, he had to do that. Because that was the cause of the divorce in that case. The initial divorce was that she got pregnant by another guy while they were married, and they went through their dissolution proceedings and everything, but she had the baby during that time, and he did not. He was on the hook for child support for his child, even though they had 50-50 shared parenting. And they actually had set up 50-50 shared parenting. 4 days with him, 4 days with her. And it was going to change to 7 and 7 when the kid got old enough to start school. The kid, by the way, just graduated. In any case, that situation, he didn't have to pay. But if he was in France, not only would he be on the hook for child support, it would be illegal for him to just get a DNA test and then take the results into court and say, hey, this is not my kid, regarding the baby. He would have to petition for the right to DNA testing, and she could fight it, and he could lose. And the court could simply say, nope, you're on the hook for child support, even though this is not your child. Not only are you on the hook for child support, even though this is not your child, shame on you for not wanting to be on the hook for child support.
Yeah.
And the thing that happens here in the United States that's really egregious with regard to men paying child support for children that are not theirs. I've known cases back when I was more active on Reddit. There was a guy that I lost touch with him in the middle of the case, so I do not know how it turned out. But his ex-wife filed for child support in their state for a child that she had cheated on him. They got divorced. She had the baby. She filed for child support, said it was his baby. DNA testing was ordered, and but there were things, and I can't remember whether it was the baby was a different color or there was something, but it was very blatantly, obviously not his baby. It might even have been, that it was like a year after the divorce. It was something that, like, the DNA testing was just confirmation.
A formality.
It was a formality, but they were still taking child support out of his pay. So he was having to fight that, and while he was fighting that, she moved to another state. Filed again.
Oh, God.
So state number 2 starts taking child support. They garnished his wages, start taking child support out for the same child. So now he had 2 states garnishing for child support for a child that was not his. And
had he been sorry, hi everyone.
Hello.
Had he been a resident of the other state, or
nope.
Does it even?
You don't have to. You don't have to. That's the thing. If, like, say I identified somebody in California and I claimed to have been there and had sex with that person and claimed that my kid was actually his son and not his father's son, I actually really could put that person through hell. First of all, and California is really bad about this, by the way. Yeah. If you live in address A for, 10 years or so, and then you move, and 6 months after you move, the state sends notice to address A while you're living in address B, that you're on the hook for child support. And a different...
They
this happened to a guy.
They can serve process by snail mail. They don't need to send a process server.
Right, and they don't have to get a signature. They don't have to prove you saw it. They don't have to prove you know about it. As long as they have mailed you a letter that says you're on the hook for child support, you're on the hook for child support. And you have a statute of limitations regarding how long before you can fight it, or as how long you're able to fight it before it's too late and you're just stuck. And that there was a guy, again, I was in contact with on Reddit a while back, who was dealing with that. He had moved. They sent notice to his old residence. He didn't answer because he never got it. It was after the amount of time, the forwarding. Everybody that was important had his new address. Everybody that he had contact with had his new address. So he didn't have any reason to keep having his mail forwarded. And since he didn't get the notice, he didn't know why it happened when his wages finally started getting garnished. They didn't start garnishing until after it was too late for him to fight. And he had to go to court and fight for his right to fight to be exempted from this child support order. And again, it was for a child that was not his. So it was a mess. And this is something that, nobody should be able to do this to another person. Nobody should be able to walk into a government agency or a courthouse or any other official place and say, that person owes me money because sexual freedom. And this is that person's child. And the state not actually demand 100% full confirmation before even considering forcing a payment. There really shouldn't be government force used to make somebody support a woman's choice to be a single custodial mother, because it is always, aside from divorce, and if she's the one that initiates the divorce, even in a divorce, it is a choice. It isn't something that's inflicted on her. Unless a guy abandons his wife and child, being a single mother with custody of your children is a lifestyle choice.
Now, I want to bring up something. I was watching I think it was Netflix series or a show about a guy. It's a different topic, but this guy had been falsely accused by his girlfriend or fiance of, all a myriad of things like sexual assault. This woman tried to ruin this man's life, right? And of course he wasn't guilty. They ended up finding out that he wasn't guilty. But during the process of the trial, and what you said, Hannah, brought this up, which is, it made me think of it, because this guy at some point in during the trial, he had moved, right? He sent out all of the forwarding addresses to everyone that he thought that he needed to know, right? But this thing was still going on. So what ended up happening is he had more charges brought upon him, and the court didn't have his forwarding address. So they recharged him as if these were brand new charges. And because they couldn't contact him, he was then found guilty of not responding to the warrant, right? So how is it that we have a court system? They can find you, they can take money from you, they can do whatever the hell it is that they want from you, but when it comes to actually trying to track you down and where you live and where you are, you need this notification. We are finding you. We are you have these charges against you. We're going to come and find you. No. Whatever address they have on file, that's what they send out, and it's just meh, whatever.
Yeah. And that's all they have to do.
Exactly. It's disgusting. Where's the accountability on the part of the justice system?
Well, that's another thing. We have our government is supposed to be a service to the people. It was never supposed to get this big, this clunky, this all-encompassing. It was never supposed to get this involved in people's lives in the first place. Mm-hmm. Not in the United States. Part of the formation of the United States was about ending that. Not about promoting it. And we've gone way off track in terms of what our government was supposed to be for. But it's completely lost accountability to the people. And that's actually that has really allowed feminists to use women's sexuality as a bargaining chip to exploit government power quite a bit. And this is one of those examples. And their morality on this, and it is a morality, they treat it very much like religious piety, really, when we're talking about women's control over the spectrum of reproductive choices. Their morality is completely and utterly fickle. They don't have any real standards. Those standards are completely changeable depending on what they want at the time. And this is one of those examples. And they are fully aware that the government works that way. They know that it's going to run over the individual, that there is going to be no responsibility taken by officials for proper contact, even when it's easy to find out. There's going to be no accountability for whether they're accurate, whether they're fair, or even whether they stick to the law. And then she's going to have the advantage the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's sickening. Like they put so much energy into going after people or these men to stick them and pin them as the father of these children. If they did as much due diligence as to make sure that these men are actually the father of these children, there would be so much less work and so much less headaches for everyone involved. But, that's the, that would be the right way to go about it, No, they just want someone they can pin, they can put that blame on and say, and extract the money from that guy. That's it. That's all they want.
Yeah, for the government, it is all about money. And then we replaced the initial spoils system with the grow the government spoils system. So for the government, it's also about justifying their jobs and spending their yearly budget to make sure that they get that same amount the next year. And then also, in addition to spending their yearly budget to make sure that they get that amount the next year and maintaining their jobs and everything, they also have to keep the public in a state of believing in government authority. And then local government, it's partly about getting federal dollars. For instance, when the child support law changed, and this is like, remember I've talked before about, both sides do it, and then you guys hear me criticize progressives all the time. This is a Republican thing. In 2000, when they had the Contract for America and they did all these welfare reform things, the traditionalists pretty much dictated how that was going to go. And traditionalism does go along with the male protector and provider role. The man is responsible for the family, the woman is responsible for the household, and the responsibility is supposed to be divided. It's not supposed to be like that the woman is unaccountable or anything like that, but then they assume that women are moral, in fact, that women are angels, right? And so they assume that if there is a problem, it's because the man is a deadbeat. And so what the Republicans put into welfare reform was, because they assumed that the divorce rate was a result of male abandonment and male failure to be the leader of his household and things like that. So women are left in dire straits because of the divorces that are 70% female initiated. People don't realize that in a lot of times. But in any case, they assumed that the solution to the welfare mother problem was to demand that men reimburse the state for the cost of those single moms. And therefore, they basically paid the states to collect child support from the fathers of women who were on welfare, or of women. Freudian slip there. The children of women who were on welfare. But when you have a mother of your child who is relying on the state and not making any effort to do better for herself and her kids, and not making any effort to make sure that she has kids with a man who's going to be part of their lives and everything, you kind of are her father, at least in terms of she's non-adult. It's not adult behavior. But in any case, so what Ohio did was, the year that law was being discussed, and when they were pretty sure how the election was going to go, they were pretty sure that was going to get passed, and they were pretty sure that the best way to get that money was going to be able to say that they were doing work to collect as much of the child support they collected as possible. The Ohio State Legislature passed a law that everybody that paid child support had to pay through the state. You couldn't give it directly to the mother of the children. Anything that was paid to the mother of the children didn't count as child support. It was just gifts. Then they made it retroactive for a year. And all the men that had been paying child support directly instead of through the state, as they'd been encouraging them to do for the past couple of years before that, all those men got put on paper into arrears, even the ones who were fully paid up. Like that happened to my husband. And he was keeping up with his child support, and all of a sudden he owed a whole year of child support that he had paid a second time, because the state decided that, and this was whether the mother was on welfare or not, right? At that point, they weren't receiving public assistance, so that hit him. But any woman receiving public assistance, if she's receiving child support in Ohio can tell the federal government, we have to collect that child support and then send it to her. And then the federal government reimburses the cost of the employees at the Child Support Enforcement Agency working that case. So they're essentially milking the federal government for millions of dollars. Every state that does this is milking the federal government for millions of dollars.
It's much like Title 4D, right?
Yeah. Much of which they're collecting on a fake effort to collect child support from men who are actually paying.
Yeah, well, I mean, like one of the things that, I mean, like, just gonna say, if you're ever in that situation where you have, if you're a woman and you don't want child support from your husband, but you have to go on welfare or whatever, right? Or the state is going to collect it on your behalf, no matter what you do or what you want. I don't, like, if that ever happened to me, if I ever actually had to enroll in the Child Support Enforcement Agency here to get child support out of my ex, right? All I would do is they'd garnish his wages, they'd send me however much money a month, and I'd just wire it. I'd send an email money transfer in the same amount back to him, right? Like, it's something that you don't, like, your husband's ex didn't have to take that money.
Yeah, she didn't have to keep it, but there's more. There's more fun here in the United States. For a while, Ohio, and I don't know if this was federal also or not, because at that time I wasn't in a relationship that it would have made. I just had friends that were dealing with it. But for a while, child support was taxed at both ends. So before the father paid child support, and which he never would see, if it came out of his check directly, he was taxed on it. But then the mother was also taxed on the receipt of the child support. So the government was out of that money. The government was taking income tax from the father, the fee for collecting it, and then also income tax. Oh, and they were holding it for 2 months. And then they were taking income tax out of it when the mother got it. But of course, child support, the child support payments are totally 100% for the benefit of the child. They're
my God.
They're not for the government. They're not made to justify government jobs and pay government employees.
Yeah, no. See, here in Canada, most jurisdictions, most provinces, because child support falls under the aegis of the province, right? The order is from, right? In most provinces previously, men were able to deduct child support from their taxes, right? So if they had to pay $800 a month, that was $800 a month that they didn't have to pay taxes on. And then the wife was charged income tax on that. And the child support calculations took that into consideration, right? They took it into consideration that the ex-wife, right, the mother, was going to be taxed on this income, so they had to set the child support at a level that would make that okay, right? That would make her able to subsist. And the calculators, the calculations would take into account that he could get a tax deduction off of it, right? But what the government then did in most of the provinces was they switched it around so that now the man got taxed on his entire gross income before child support was considered, and the woman pays nothing in taxes, right? And this doesn't benefit the woman at all because they just adjusted the calculations, right, to essentially compensate for the fact that he's now paying taxes and she isn't on that child support money, right? The only beneficiary of this legislation that they pushed forward as this huge thing that would help all of these single mothers. Oh, it's going to help all of these single mothers because they're not going to have to pay taxes on their income. Yeah, no bullshit. They're just going to get less child support because it's all tax-free, right? The calculations are going to be done a different way. What it is that when you have a man who makes $100,000 a year and he pays $40,000 in child support and he can deduct that $40,000, now he's only taxed for a $60,000 income, right? And she's taxed for $40,000. And with the tax brackets the way they are, the government gets less money, right? But if they can charge him on his gross income of $100,000, he's in a higher tax bracket, and he's paying that $40,000 that would be going to her. That's taxed at a higher rate when they're taking it off of him. So it's the government that benefited from this, right? And they pushed it. They pushed it as something that was going to benefit women. It didn't fucking benefit women one bit, right? Everybody went and applied to have their child support scaled down, right, due to this new thing, this new issue. Right, all the men did. Most of the jurisdictions that brought this in did some retroactive rejiggering, forgave some arrears, right? Lowered the child support. Most of the jurisdictions started calculating based on a different model. Right. The only people who benefited was the fucking government. They got more in tax revenue.
Right. Well, see, I think a big part of this problem is that, you know, when these situations happen, you know, we always go after the man, right? And the man is seen to be, you know, the higher earner. And in most situations, yes, that is true. So when you have these like celebrity breakups, you know, these people who are rich and famous beyond all belief, and they then have these situations where they have to now figure out who's going to pay what. Well, you know, you look at how much the man makes in that situation. If he then has to spend $10,000-$20,000 a month on child support, how does that skew the ratio for the rest of the men that then have to pay child support? You know, because we're looking at men as if they are the sole provider, right? And that's fine. Okay, whatever. But it takes two to tango. So what I would like to see is if we are going to assign a numerical value to what a father should be providing for that child in the case of a breakup, then I think we should be doing the same thing for a mother and holding her to the same goddamn standards. Okay, if this man has to provide this much money,
she better not be at the nightclub at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday.
Exactly. And that is the other part of this argument, right? Because men are just giving this money to women and to quote unquote take care of the child, but there is no accountability at all as to how this woman spends this money. She can spend this money on her new boyfriend. She can, you know, doll herself up, buy whatever, and just the child can be left in rags, but because
you know what was hilarious when I first got with my ex, right? He was paying child support. He had just been freed from his alimony obligation, right? Which because his ex married somebody else, somebody who's in a very, very good financial position. They immediately, after they got married, they bought a house, a brand new house. They then paid to have it raised up so that they could have a full basement rather than a crawl space. So they paid $35,000 upon buying the house to renovate it. And they had 2 late model cars parked in the driveway. She wasn't working, but she had her kids in daycare and after school care. One of them was 3 and the other was 8, right? So, like our child support obligation paid for her to keep her kids in daycare and after school care so that she could have her days all to herself at home. Right? Okay. This is the woman that my ex was married to and produced 2 children with. But one of the things that he came up against, because occasionally he would, when he was still living in sort of the same area, within a half-hour drive, he would sometimes pick them up at daycare, and daycare would say, the daycare worker would say essentially, like, your kids are dressed in rags, like, all the time, right? Their clothes are just, the pants are too short, they're ill-fitting, they're too small, and she was doing that, and she would send them to us with a suitcase full of rags, right? Like, and I'm thinking to myself, like, I've been to your house, bitch. Okay, I've seen your furniture. I've seen your perm. I've seen your professionally manicured nails, right? I've seen your car. Why are your kids dressed in rags? Like, what the fuck? Right?
Oh, and the trick is they only dress in rags when they're coming to your house. If they're not going to your house, then they're getting showed off to friends and family in nice clothes and stuff. I know that trick too. I lived through that as well.
Well, I just decided because the first few times, right, we would go and we would buy them clothes, and then we would send them with those clothes home, and then they would come back in. They would come back in rags.
Yeah,
and then I was just like,
exactly.
No, don't send any clothes. We have clothes for them here, right? And we'll keep clothes for them here, and you can keep clothes for them there, and that'll be that, right?
Yeah, it's like that's the purpose, right? You're not doing enough, so I'm gonna send your children to you in these rags, disheveled, and you need to do something for them, So of course, you would go and provide your kids if you see them coming to you in this state. Yeah, I don't want my children dressed in rags, so of course you go and you spend the money to take care of your children. But then what? They go back and then they come back in the same fucking rags. Like, where's the money going? It's a ploy to like pull this kind of sympathy and money out of the father. Like, you're not doing enough. Okay. Here's your children that you've been neglecting because I haven't wanted to allow you to see them. So now here they are, and they're just in torn up clothes. So what are you going to do for them? You know what
was hilarious, right? Is this woman, right? When my son was born in July, it was Christmas, right? Christmas holidays. And we were living quite far away. We were living too far away at that point to visit them constantly, sort of every other weekend type thing. So essentially, we got them for school holidays. So it was Christmas holidays, and she phones and she says, and I'm still breastfeeding this child, right? He was 6-7 months old. And unbeknownst to me, I was, I wasn't pregnant again yet, but so but I'm still breastfeeding this child. And she phones and she says, I'm going to need the child support. And I was like, I thought we had agreed that, you know, when we have them, if we're taking them for 3 weeks, right? That's 3 weeks, right? Like, you know, it's going to be late. I thought we agreed that it was okay that we were going to be late. And she says to me, maybe it's time for you to go back to work. And I'm like, I have a 7-month-old baby. What do you need this money for? She says, I need it to keep their daycare spots open. So that was what the child support that we were paying was going towards.
And what was she doing? What was she doing that she couldn't watch her own children?
She was working from home doing books for a dentist.
Oh, wow.
Meaning that she really didn't need the daycare.
Exactly.
She did not need the daycare, did not need the after-school care, did not need any of that. But she needed that child support because if she didn't pay the daycare provider for the month of December, then they wouldn't keep the daycare spots open for her kids, right? They would give them to somebody else.
I was
like, you don't even work outside the home, bitch.
When my kid was little, I had 3 jobs. 3, okay? Most of the time, I had 3 jobs. And I didn't use daycare, right? I traded daycare favors back and forth with other parents that I knew really well. One of whom, like, I knew her from college, right? And so I had known her since, like, my son was born in 99. I knew her since 1992. And we were very close friends. You know, that's the people that I would trust him with. My parents, you know, he got extra time with the grandparents as much as possible. My husband's parents, you know, my in-laws, people that I knew. I didn't take him someplace where there were a bunch of women I had never met before until I thought I could trust the Y when we had a time period in our neighborhood where there was a sort of a turnover of people moving in and out, and there were no kids. There were just no little kids to play with. So I thought, well, if we go to the Y, that's an organization I can trust. And maybe a couple of days a week for a few hours a day, he can play with kids that are in the daycare there.
Yeah.
That lasted until the first time he was bullied and was punished for getting into a fight because another kid backed him into a corner and hit him. And he didn't hit back. He didn't kick. He just looked at the other kid like, what are you doing? You know, because he was always a lot bigger than the other kids. And when he got that was it, you know, and they're like, well, we have 0 tolerance for fighting. And I'm like, well, I have 0 tolerance for stupidity. You're not getting another dime from us. He's not coming back. And I went, you know, made friends locally and found other kids for him to play with.
It was the same with me, you know, like with my youngest. I didn't do this with my older 2 because they were 15 and they always played together. You know, they sort of had each other, right? But then it was 6 years later, I had my 3rd, right? And so when he was 3, I decided, okay, well, we'll pay the money. We'll put him 2 mornings a week in the local daycare just to get him around other kids his own age. And so, you know, like I did that for a while, but I never actually was, you know, like I had a friend in town who would look after my kids. Like my ex and I arranged our shifts so that one of us was always home, right? And we worked at the same place. We were in a small town. We worked at the same hotel. And I would drive with the kids to work and sit in the parking lot and wait. And he would come out and I would go in and he would drive them home. And that's how we did things. And he worked 8 hours a day and I worked between 5 and 7 hours a day. Right. So essentially we did that. And then when he would have to go down island to go pick up his boys to bring them up because she wouldn't actually go out of her way to help her son see us, he would have to drive all the way down and up. I relied on this friend of mine, and it was just like, okay, so she's helping me out, and she would drive me to work. She would come pick up my kids, right? Drive me to work, drive the kids to her place, because my vehicle was, of course, down island. And then she would pick me up from work and drive us all home and all of this, right? And in return, I reupholstered her sofa and saved her like $1,500. So, because she was just like, I don't want to have to buy a new sofa. It's going to be $1,500. And I was like, you could just reupholster this. $150 worth of fabric, right? So I did that for her, right? So it's like you trade off. There's the barter system, that sort of the underground female economy, which is the only economy that's even functional in North Korea, by the way. But the underground female economy, that between mothers and grandmothers and aunts and female friends and all of that stuff, right? That tends to make it that, you don't have to pay for childcare often if you not with money, if you don't want to. So.
No, yeah, I traded with. I actually had two friends from college. Now that I think about it, once I moved down here to Dayton, that I traded with. I had a friend from high school that occasionally used to come over, and there was a young lady that my family got to know really well, and she's a mommy now, and she married a great guy, and they have kids, and it's neat to see her with her kids. But I never really liked the idea of having my son in daycare, and it's just, it's my kid, I'm gonna raise him, and my husband and I, and this is not somebody else's responsibility, and it's not somebody else's privilege, and that's just the way we kind of were. But and he went to school and worked full time, and I worked 3 jobs, and we still didn't use, once we came down here to Dayton, we didn't use daycare. And what I figured out after, if there's any young moms listening or any young dads listening that have thought about, like, moms are the ones that usually think of, well, let's go to daycare for child contact. Dads usually figure out other ideas. But I figured out after that, I met the way that I ended up meeting people that had kids and everything. We went to, I think we did McDonald's and Burger King. We went out and we found play places, the restaurants with the play places, and met kids, and he just played with other kids there. And, this is a better way because your kid learns to get along with a lot of other people. And at a very young age, and you meet people, and because parents are going to talk if their kids are playing together, and that's actually, if there's no kids in your neighborhood for a while, and your kid is not in school yet, that's a good way. Another one is if you're part of any kind of an organization. I was in a sort of a church at the time, and some of the kids there, they played together, but yeah, daycare is like the worst possible place for your kid to make friends. And it's a completely useless thing to do in terms of, for that reason. And there's really no need for it necessarily. I'm almost asocial, and I still manage to find other parents to trade caregiving with. So there's that.
There you go. Yeah. Okay,
I interrupted Laura, and I'll let her make her point, and then I'll move on to the next thing.
All right.
I forgot what I was gonna say, but I'm completely out of this conversation because I don't have kids. So,
well, there you go. But yeah, and I mean, we basically started out with feminist morality as fickle because they're willing to exploit women's sexuality as a transactional thing, and ended up on child support, which really is a way of women exploiting their sexuality as a transactional thing. So there you go. But on to the next one, and I think I have to actually put Lauren back in here. and I turned to this screen a moment ago to show everybody just. And I put it in the chat, but I'm going to actually say it. We have a storm rolling in again, which is just great because, we just got hit. Dayton was essentially attacked by angry air elementals. I mean, of the huge variety, right? Huge air elementals.
Well, we are all glad.
Yeah.
We're all glad that you and yours are safe.
Yeah, we really lucked out. We had almost no damage. The building about 200 yards, I guess, to the east of us in the quad of our apartment complex that direction, the entire roof was just ripped off. It's gone, and it's being replaced. I mean, they started replacing it the next day.
Wow.
But nobody was killed in that either. And this was an F3 that hit us. It was we were really fortunate. All we lost was a little plastic greenhouse, that fit on the back patio, and the fence that the tornado dropped the greenhouse frame on after it blew the greenhouse up all over the neighborhood. Like, we found pieces of the greenhouse all over the neighborhood. We have not found all of the pieces of the greenhouse. So, but it's just a greenhouse, right? It's not our roof.
Or a person.
Right.
Jesus.
The buildings street side of us, which we were in the lee. They got hit first. At the end that the tornado hit them on first, the bricks got ripped off by the wind. So that's how bad that one was. And if you look through my Twitter feed, if you look through the media in my Twitter feed, there's video of it, because we were brilliant and we were standing in the door looking for it, like right before it hit. So if you just, public service announcement, guys, if you hear it, it's too late. We were in the doorway, and I was filming over my husband's shoulder because he was being a guy, so he wouldn't let me out in the storm, right? And there was not severely heavy rain. It was raining, but it wasn't bad. The wind was just picking up. The emergency sirens were blaring, but there was no hail. There was none of the signs I'm used to seeing for tornadoes. So I'm filming and everything, and all of a sudden I hear the chugging sound, and I'm like, bathroom now, and we start heading towards the bathroom, and we shut the door and start heading that direction, and my ears popped, and I'm like, you guys probably have never seen me panic. That was when I yelled at the guys and everything, and they're looking at me like, what's wrong with you? We hadn't finished shutting the door to the bathroom when the tornado hit our building.
I was going to ask you. What you described a chugging sound. What is that?
It sounds like a train going by on the tracks, except without the clickety clackety sound, and it's really kind of this deep. It's almost like a woof 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 kind of sound that it makes, and then underneath it, there's this really hollow, deep, almost a whistle, but it's low enough that it's closer to. It's like somebody took a giant jug and is blowing air through it. I mean,
yeah.
And you hear that sound, the tornado is very close. And it was dark. It was night. It was 11:13. The timestamp on my video was 11:13. And at 11:16, I shot my first damage photo, which was also dumb because we came out of the bathroom after we stopped hearing the tornado hitting the building, because there's a sound the wind makes as it's hitting the building that is it's unique. I'm not sure I can even describe that one, but it's you know it when you hear it. And we heard the greenhouse frame. It's a real heavy wood. It was a big heavy frame underneath our aluminum greenhouse with its plastic panels. Thank goodness they were not glass, because they went way up in the air and they fell everywhere. But in any case, that hits the fence. We hear that. Then it's quiet. We come out of the bathroom. I look out the back door. Now there's rain. And I posted a picture of the twisted greenhouse frame and everything. And well, as we're heading towards to look out the back door to see what it did to the backyard, we heard what we thought was the sound of lightning maybe striking a transformer in the area because it had that crackling sound and a crashing sound. And that was the roof being ripped off the building 200 yards to the east of us, approximately. That was carried over the buildings to the east of our apartment complex and dropped in. There's a shopping center on the the end of our block that has a nice big parking lot, and it dropped half of it in that parking lot and across the street in the Kroger on the other side of the street. So like this was, and then it went up Kemp and just ripped the hell out of that area. And that area looks like a meat grinder went through that. They didn't quite cross paths, but there was an F2 to the east of the F3, and they were on converging paths. And there's this little triangle in Beaver Creek that is just absolutely wrecked. It looked like I said, it looked like somebody just dropped a giant meat grinder on it. And so like we really lucked out big time.
Now,
but there's my little public service announcement. When they tell you to take shelter, you take shelter, because like all the signs, even if you've been in tornadoes before, because like I've been in 3 or 4 tornadoes actually, and I've never seen one this dry before. Right before the storm hits right before the funnel hits the area that you're in. Usually there's like this just sheets of rain, and this was different. And it's like there's our after show story is one of the local news casters, one of the local weather guys, was getting complaints from local fans of The Bachelorette, and he went off. And then he had to apologize, but he went off. He was just shocked that people didn't understand the seriousness of the storms. And he told everybody off, and it was like, this is serious. You have to take this seriously. And he got some criticism for that, too. Well, he was right. Like, the Dayton metro area looks like a bomb went off in several places. The Beaver Creek area got hit hard. Trotwood was decimated. It was, there's whole buildings that are just gone. There's a house on my street that's just gone. So if we, like I said earlier, if the show disappears, it's because I'm hiding in the bathroom. Because if they tell us to take shelter, we will be taking shelter. So
no, and I just wanted to ask, like, I know we're off on a tangent, but I'm from the East Coast. I moved to California. I lived in California for over a decade, and the main thing that people warn you about is earthquakes. When you go to California, well, I never experienced an earthquake that made me afraid. I never had that big earthquake in '89. There was nothing even remotely similar to that I have experienced in my decade of living in California. Now, maybe I was just lucky, or in the right part of town. I mean, of course there were earthquakes that happened, but it was never like a jolting kind of life-threatening kind of thing. So I wonder, like, living in the Midwest, is the threat of tornadoes kind of similar to what the threat of earthquakes are to California? You know what I mean? Because like you just said, that you've been through 3. Oh,
I've been through more than that. I've seen with my own eyes. I've seen 3. One of them from the inside. It was surrounding my parents' house, and we were in the basement, and it got really quiet. And I went up to see if it was over, and I'm looking, and it was raining sideways. And you could see that, in the lightning, you could see the direction of the rain. And, in the north windows, the rain was headed, one direction. And out the east windows, it was headed another direction. And out the west windows, it was headed a third direction. So I came up when the tornado was, right over the house. And I went back down. I'm like, nope, it hasn't passed yet. We have to wait here for a while. And I was stayed completely calm, because my kid was down there. And then we hear this mild thunk, and I'm like, oh, I wonder which of the planters just got destroyed. My parents' house was actually a bigger house, and it's brick. It was actually made at the end of the 1800s, so it's very sturdy construction. The mild thunk that we heard was half a tree falling on the roof. But that was north of here, and that was a smaller tornado. It was just a very old tree. But no, honestly, it's not something that's like Ohio is not a big tornado magnet the way, like, if I lived in Kansas, I'd be seeing bigger tornadoes and much more frequent tornadoes than here. Kansas people from Kansas would not have made the mistake that my husband and I made last night, because they would have seen what we saw before, and they would have known the danger signs, because that shit happens to them all the time. And they just get pummeled. And that whole area, the whole plains area, gets pummeled like that every year, and it always has. Texas tornadoes are terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And there's the idea of an F5 going through. That's not a rare thing for the plains areas. But the day my husband and I got married, an F5 hit Van Wert, Ohio. And my brother and his wife lived in that area. They were at our wedding. We got married in Bowling Green. So they weren't in the tornado area when it happened. But the gas station they fueled up at to get to our wedding, when they came back, the entire building was gone. There was no debris. There was no nothing. It was just gone. It ate it. It vaporized it. And they overshot their turn because their landmarks, weren't there. And then, of course, they get into town and saw the wreckage of it and everything, and it was just insane. But yeah, that's the situation here. That's why I flashed that warning up. Like I said, we may vanish on you guys. I probably won't, because we're hoping that this set that's coming through is not going to be as bad. But I am hearing thunder, and I'm unplugged now. I'm on battery power because I don't want... This building has taken lightning hits through a transformer before. And I lost a computer to that already once. And I've got a protector now and everything, but I still, I'm unplugged. But in any case, back to the regular part of the show. Our next bit of our lovely little listicle. And done on their terms. Number 4. The most important thing about a woman is her vagina. Of all of the bargaining chips one could use, other political issues, logical arguments, discussion points on morals and ethics, even fallacious appeals to pity, Milano chose bad voter, no nookie. Because apparently the almighty golden vag carries that much more value than a woman's mind.
Well, okay.
Number 3.
I'm just gonna say it's awfully hard to argue with the vag, because all it does is just demands, right? So you can lay out the most cogent argument anybody could think of. You could essentially be Christopher Hitchens and John Stuart Mill all rolled into one, and present that with all of the eloquence and the elucidation of the Greek freaking philosophers, okay? And it'll just be like, but vag. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? There you go.
Yeah, and it just, to me, like the arguing with your sexuality, arguing with the idea of, well, if you don't do this, I won't sleep with you. Like that it's not. Obviously, that's withholding affection. That's it's relational aggression. It's emotional abuse and everything. But like the thing I really wanted to point out was that it essentially devalues everything else about the person.
Yeah, no, it's like, what, like, you expect me to actually come up with counter arguments? You expect me to actually argue the position? It's literally like Bill Burr said in one of his routines there, like when a woman is right, she'll stay on point. right? She'll stay in the pocket of the argument. She'll stay on point, you know, and she'll get you down on your knees begging for forgiveness. More power to her, right? You know, totally respect it, right? But when she knows she's wrong, she'll go rogue, right? And what's rogue, right? Okay, so she conjures up some Hail Mary statement like, oh, you're just going to die alone. Your father did, right? That she knows is going to like drive you insane, drive you over the edge, right? And then you call, and then you rub one out for, you know, several days. She won't hook up with you because that's how women do things, right? And it's like, I look at it and I'm like, yeah, it kind of is how women do things. I mean, like there are times when I have been like, okay, you know, absolutely, I am not going to have sex with you right now. Right? I am that pissed off at you. I'm not going to have sex with you right now. But you know, the next morning you wake up, you get a fresh start, and it's a new day, and you realize that you still love each other, and then everything goes back to normal. Right? It's not something that I would hold over anybody and say, okay, like I'm just not going to have sex with you until you give me exactly what I want. And if I can't beat somebody with an argument, then I need to reevaluate my position.
Right. It is not necessarily abusive to not be affectionate in the middle of a moment of anger. And I mean, that's kind of where makeup sex comes from. Like, you know, you get mad at somebody, you're in a different attitude toward them, and you want. And I know there are some people who have angry sex too, and I guess I've never tried that. But
Well,
the one person that it's really genuinely hard for me to get angry at is my husband.
Angry sex. Angry sex is hot, Hannah.
It's very hard for me to even just look at him and stay angry. I just...
Okay, well, see, there's your problem.
When you meet him, you'll understand.
That's why your sex life is lackluster,
Hannah. No, it's not. We're not going there.
I'm just gonna say, I'm just gonna say, if you're not having angry, you're not having.
I can't stay angry. You have to be angry to have angry sex.
I'm just joking.
I'm sorry.
Joking.
I'm still at the point of passionate sex, so this angry sex thing
doesn't. Well, that doesn't stop.
It doesn't translate.
Like, angry sex is so fucking hot. It's like literally you when you want to hit him. You know, like when you're like at that point where like you just want to freaking punch him in the head.
I don't want to punch him in the head
several times.
No. Right? No.
In front of people, right? Then you just take him in the bedroom and you just hash out your differences in a constructive way.
Listen, I came from a relationship that lasted for almost a decade, where in the beginning, yes, there was intimacy, but towards the end, there was none, like zero, you know, and it had been that way for at least the past 5 years of the relationship, where, I mean, if we had sex once a year, that would be something I could mark on my calendar, you know? So yeah, it for me, it's a huge change. Like when there is just, you know, there was not even a point where there could be angry sex, because even if I was angry at him, I just did not want to have sex with him. But
you had hallway sex.
But listen, Karen,
you've heard of hallway sex, right? I don't know if the listeners have, right? Hallway sex is when you pass each other in the hallway and he says, "Fuck you."
Yeah, but it wasn't even that. It wasn't even that I'm angry at you, let's work it out, let's bang it out. It wasn't even that, you know.
It was just all dead.
It would, yeah, exactly. you know, so it was inevitable that it would come to an end, you know, but, you know, there it is. And now I'm on the other end of that, and it's the complete opposite, you know. It's really night and day, like having someone that absolutely wants to be with you, and coming from a situation where it was like, I don't know, I'm just here because I committed to it, you know.
Yeah, see, that's a relationship like that is doomed. And I mean,
Yeah.
like my husband and I, we've been together for 21 years, and we were friends before that. We knew each other before that, and of course, you know, like we were in the same gaming group, and you know, so like I knew him, and the guy that I was with before him was actually friends with him and his family. So we actually had hung out before that. So we've known each other probably about, well, we've known each other as long as I've known my college friends, because that's when I met him. Well, that's when I met him in adulthood. Got this, I guess you could say, Hannah level romantic story. I grew up around, you know, a little lake town, and my family and I used to go hang out there all the time, and I met this boy when I was around 10 years old. I was in the 4th grade, or rather, I was about to start the 4th grade, and we made a sandcastle on the beach, and his brothers came over and wrecked it. So we made another sandcastle, and I think we were having a good time. And then we left. I left. He left. And years later, I remember seeing the same face on. There was a local business that did senior portraits and everything, and they were allowed to come to the school and put up a ad, you know, and show. They were not officially promoted by the school, but they were the ones doing the yearbook photos and stuff, and they advertised for their senior portraits, and they always picked a teenager that they did their senior portrait to be their ambassador, and the ambassadorship was your picture is the picture they're going to use, and same face, right? And I'm like, that's that guy. Well, then I go up to university and meet my university friends in my gaming group, and we gamed for months before I met him and his family, and he was only there a couple times, and then not there again for a year, and then came back. And it was because, you know, they had a kid during that time. The younger stepdaughter, you know. Well, I recognized it, and I was like thinking about him, like, it can't be, you know, the same guy. So after we had gone through all of the process of like just being buddies, being friends, and then our relationships dissolved around us, and it was like mine was my fault as much as the guy I was with. I really should have broken things off sooner, and his was his marriage, and his ex-wife left him for another guy, and then told everybody it was because he cheated on her even though he didn't. So we start hanging out. We not dated for 6 months. Then we really got together for real. And then we started talking about it, and he remembered. So I met him and played with him when we were kids and didn't even know that was my future. Like 10 years old. We didn't live in the same community. They just came down to my area because of that lake. And so there's your oddly romantic story of the evening. But I have never been able to hold on to a good mad. Like, not at him. I can get absolutely furious with anybody else. And, like, you know, short fuse, big bomb level furious. But not at my hubby. There's just something special about him. And like I said, I think when you meet him, you'll understand. I just don't know how anybody could stay mad at him for anything. But in any case, the idea of actually using my sex to, you know, as a weapon against him, that would just, I can't imagine even want to do that.
Yeah.
There's just no way. Like with me, I wouldn't be able to withhold sex, not from the guy that I'm with at the moment. Like it is just too intrinsic a part of his life. This guy who, like, if he was not dating anybody, he'd be 14 times a day. So, and he probably would have sex 14 times a day if he had time to do it in. So it's like, yeah, no, there's no getting around the issue that, like, he has a very high libido, and I have I've developed tennis elbow from jerking him off. So make of that what you will.
How's your jaw? How's your jaw feeling, Karen?
Yeah, no,
how's your gag reflex?
I have a hair trigger gag reflex. He's learned to live with it. It disappoints him all the time, but that doesn't stop us from being very good together. But I couldn't even imagine. Like, there are times in the moment when I'm very, very mad at him, and I'm just like, there's just, well, it's not when I'm mad at him so much as when he says something that, you know, or does something that's hurtful or whatever, or that I feel hurt by. When I feel hurt, it's not going to happen right now. You're going to have to wait. When I'm mad at him, yeah, I can often just take that anger and put it to good use. So yeah, but yeah, it's like I don't. He wouldn't put up with being with a woman who withheld sex, and I actually respect him for that. Right? It's like, essentially, like, withheld sex for an ulterior motive is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't think my husband would put up with that either.
Yeah, and I respect that. So it's like, essentially, because I respect him, I wouldn't want to withhold sex for some ulterior motive.
And for the quote miners out there, we're not talking about, you know, they'd force us. No, they'd leave. You know, if we were abusive, our guys wouldn't stay with us, because they're no. And I wouldn't have gotten together with a guy and stayed with a guy who would stay with me if I was abusive. Like, and he's been through that once, and he tried to make things work, and he learned pretty well that just doesn't work that way, and so he's not going to do that. He's not going to put up with that kind of abuse. And, like, both of us, we have this, if one of us gets out of line, you know, in terms of how we're treating it, and a lot of times with me, when I do it, I get caught up in something and I fail to give my family the attention they deserve. And I get told about it, you know. And with him, it's very rare kind of thing that happens at all, and it's usually something along the same lines, you know, where it's something else takes precedent when it shouldn't, and I'll say something, you know, because, like, you got to be able to talk about stuff and get it worked out without getting all up in each other's faces and getting angry about it, or you know, you're not having a functional relationship, either if you're avoiding talking about things that are important, or if you're unable to talk about things that are important without lashing out at each other and hurting each other. And, like, occasionally one of us will be a clod and hurt the other's feelings completely unintentionally. And like, when I do that, it usually is I've mirrored an ex-wife behavior for a completely different reason and under a completely different attitude than with which she did it, but it strikes him the way it struck him when she did it, and he feels like he's being treated the way he was treated when she did it, and then I have to say, no, I don't mean it that way, and we make up, and every so often I will take something the wrong way just like that, and I, you know, like, I can understand not getting horny when your feelings are hurt. But I'm one of those people, my feelings aren't hurt very easily most of the time. Like you can frustrate me to tears, but having my feelings hurt takes a lot, because either something is true and I need to work on it, and I'll be embarrassed, or if I've done something really stupid or wrong, I might be ashamed. But it's hard to take it personally when you're actually wrong. Or it's not true, and then it's not important. You might correct the person's misconception about you, but it's not personal, except for when somebody's deliberately doing it to be mean, which makes them less important. And so it's hard to take it personally but the few times I get something happen where my feelings are actually hurt, I'm the person that will want a hug. I gotta make up. And so the few times that we've had arguments that I've actually gotten upset over, my next thing is there has to be a cuddle, or I will cry. And then it's not one of those, guilt trippy things. It's just that I get into that state, and that's it. But yeah, the idea of like lashing out and being mean and threatening to withhold affection and all that kind of stuff. When women do
I
that,
make all kinds. I make all kinds of threats, never to withhold affection.
Yeah, I will tear your arm off and beat you with it.
Yeah, I'll smother you with a pillow tonight. Yeah, I'm gonna cash in on your life.
Yeah, stuff that you don't mean, and it's obvious that you don't mean it.
Oh no, I often mean it, but I'm just too lazy to follow through. But essentially, like, because I mean, he's 240 pounds. Like, how am I going to dispose of that?
Yeah.
But I don't even have a functional upstairs bathroom, right? I can't even like freaking dissolve his body in the bathtub, right? Because like it's just going to leak all over my router downstairs.
All right,
So,
Carrie.
yeah.
You're thinking,
that would be bad because then you couldn't be on the show.
That's right. And so I have to really assess my priorities, right?
We're
really introspect.
We're crossing into the realms of premeditated.
Pi
it's like,
Delta has pointed out if an arm is torn off, it is no longer the man's property. Reference sarcastically, of course.
If an arm has been torn,
so it's okay if you hit him with it.
That's right. That's absolutely right. He has no right to dictate how I use that arm. Yeah. So, but no, and it's like honestly, the number of times I've publicly threatened to kill him, I think if I actually did kill him, no prosecutor would actually try and prosecute.
Nobody would believe.
She would never have publicly announced she was going to kill him like 1,000 times before she actually did it. But no, it's like with I don't know, the idea of withholding sex, right? And when you actually talk about intimate relationships, when you withhold sex, you're withholding something more than just sex, right? It's not like a prostitute who's saying, yeah, no, I took your money and now I'm not going to, right? It's actually, it's withholding something that is an oh my fucking God, my throat. Sorry,
but especially within the confines of a marriage, withholding intimacy from another one is
well, and then unless
it's an emotional attack.
Yes,
it's an attack on his self-image too, because women might not even understand this.
But hold on, you're saying his, and I am sitting here telling you that I have been the victim.
You've been the target, and it's an attack on your self-image too. Because
it is not only women that withhold sex.
Right. That is true. Although women are the ones that are more known for it.
Well, they're more likely to do it.
You're sleeping on the couch tonight, mister.
Oh God, any man. Okay, I'm gonna give you a piece of advice. If she can't stand to lie next to you in bed. If she, like if she's like, you're sleeping on the couch. No, you pay for that bed. Okay? That is your bed. And if she doesn't want to lie next to you, she can sleep on the fucking couch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right?
Listen,
you go and you lie in, and you lie there and you just feel her vibrate with rage next to you, and know that you have won. Know that you have won. Know that you have asserted your ownership of your own house, your own domain, your own bed, right? And that she cannot dictate to you and send you out of the bed that you pay for, right? Just because you pissed her off. Let her lie there awake all night in a rage, vibrating. Let her do it, or she can move to the fucking couch. Because if she's the one who doesn't want to sleep next to you, she's the one who can fucking move.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
and
don't put up with that.
I have never been the type to force someone out of the bed. I don't care where. If you want to sleep next to me, fine. But I'm not going to. I guess that's just not my personality. I'm not the type to force you out of a place where I feel that you have, authority.
A right to be.
Exactly.
A right to be.
Exactly. We live in this place together. We share the bills. We share everything. You have just as much right to this bed as I do. Okay, if you do not want to sleep next to me, I'm not going to force you out of the bed, but this is my bed as well, and I'm going to sleep here. So if you don't want to be here, you're perfectly fine to sleep on the couch, and, no harm, no foul. If you don't want me to sleep in the bed, then, you know what I mean? But maybe that's just me. I am very amenable. I'm very flexible like that.
The person who wants to not be lying next to the other person is the person who should move.
Exactly.
I actually resent everybody that kicks their guy out of the bed. Just for a completely different reason. Okay, for the first 5 years of our kid's life, we lived 80 miles apart. It sucked. We slept 80 miles apart. It was awful. 80 miles.
Only 80?
80 miles is enough. 5 miles is enough. You're not in the same house. You're not under the same roof. And you don't get to see each other every day. I know you're in a much longer distance relationship. And I know the number of miles and everything. But this like in a marriage, when you have a child together, and it kills me. And I've worked nights repeatedly, and I'm working nights now, and I love my job. My job is a great job, and I love what I'm doing, and it's important to me and everything. But I hate the fact that we're not in the bed at the same time on a lot of the nights. That it's not the same. It's not, sleeping is not as restful after you've gotten into a relationship with someone where you're consistently sleeping in the same bed. When you're pair bonded like that, it's not as restful to sleep alone. And I drove everybody nuts when we were in Australia, because we didn't have Wi-Fi, and I could not Skype call my husband every night. And it was like, and they all had to hear about it. They were like, we got to get someplace with Wi-Fi or I'm going to lose my mind. I was such a wimp about it. And then I hear about, well, I kicked him out of, he slept on the couch last night because I was so mad. And I'm like, fuck you.
Exactly. And it really, it pains me, I see people who are just, the broken relationships, and just, they're upset about the most ridiculous, the most inundating bullshit, and it's driving people apart, because we just don't know how to relate to each other. If we could just get back to the basics of, relating to each other on a very, fundamental level. What do you like to do? I like to do the same thing. Can we relate? Okay, great. And it's not that anymore because of social media. Our interactions have been enhanced so so fast on such a level that we cannot keep up with, right? Our laws cannot keep up with the rate that we interact with each other. And it's just a cause of so many problems that we could get into, but I won't. But
well, honestly, laws shouldn't be the way that we handle the way we interact with each other.
Well,
like
no,
it really not on a interpersonal relationship like that. Aside from you may not kill other people. That I can see having laws related to that, but you can't break off your relationship without the state's permission. Bothers me.
Right.
That bothers me. I think that causes more problems than it solves. Much more.
Yeah. You know what? There was an article that I just passed by on Twitter, and I want to figure out what it was, but it was something about Alison commented on it because it was something about like a de facto relationship, and this was something that is happening in Australia where people who have long distance relationships are trying to figure out if there's some kind of legal liability between the two. But you're in a long distance relationship, you don't live together, you don't share the same house expenses. So how is it that you feel that this person has any kind of liability towards you, and what you have to deal with is beyond. But again, I want to find the article so I can look at it. I see Alison is around, but maybe we can talk about it in the after chat.
Honestly, with respect to the whole long distance relationship thing, there shouldn't be any liability.
No,
you don't support each other. You don't have common expenses other than the travel of seeing each other, and that's an individual thing even as well.
Exactly.
And in fact, like the whole palimony thing, that was for people who don't know. Palimony was created essentially because a woman who was in a relationship with Clint Eastwood sued him because of the extent to which they had their relationship was like a marriage. But I think if a couple has no children together, and even with common property and everything, the government really has no business. It really has no business getting involved unless there is actual outright endangerment of the child involved. The parents really should be responsible for working things out if there's a divorce, or maintaining their relationship in order to avoid. David Smith, no, I was pretty sure it was the Clint Eastwood case that was the palimony. I'm going to have to look that up now.
Yeah, I think it was, because I'm sure that they were not married, and if I'm remembering correctly, it was the only reason that it sticks out in my memory is because
Sandra Locke was her name.
Yeah, she like maybe half African American, some kind of person of some sort of color.
No, she was. Well, she could have been, but she was a blonde.
Sandra Locke She was blonde with these like super striking dark blue eyes. They were like almost indigo colored eyes.
So it looked vulnerable, like somebody was about to hit her. Like you look at her and you'd have the instinct to protect her just from looking at her because her eyes were like huge, but
huge and this absolutely they were like an absolutely unreal color as well.
She was in 6 of his movies.
Pale blonde hair and
her eyes were like this.
Pale, freckled, slightly freckled skin.
See if I can. I'm gonna ignore this in the chat. I used my one computer to look it up, and I'll show the image now here. I just have to open it. Now she's gone. She passed away, but going to bring this up in the window. See if we can show her face. This is the woman we're talking about, and if you can see, like, I don't know if you can see it on the YouTube screen, but her eyes are this like kind of weird cross between green and brown. Very, very striking. And this is her when she was older, but she was in like, she was in a bunch of different movies of his. And the one I'm remembering is The Outlaw Josie Wales. But she was, if I scroll down, she was in, I'm sure it'll say. There we go. Yep, The Outlaw Josie Wales. And then go down. She was in a whole bunch of different things. And, but she sued him and won. And that was where the term palimony came from. This is in April 1989, Locke filed a palimony lawsuit against her. I think that's where the term came from. It might be that hers was just the most famous, but she got a pretty big settlement there, $1.5 million 3-year contract for her to develop and direct films at Warner Brothers. So, it was like a heck of a change. But honestly, this is the government basically saying that if a man is in a relationship with a woman, he's financially responsible for her, and he owes her either the continuation of that relationship or the continuation of his financial responsibility for her, even if the relationship ends. And, personally, I think that's basically nuts. Just nuts. And so, in any case, that, once again, women exploiting their vaginas, making their vaginas the most important thing about them.
She was worth $12.5 million.
Yep. She got pretty rich there. But and it was just okay. So Howard Schoonover says it was Lee Marvin and Michelle Triola, 1979. So let's see what I can do with that. See if I can copy that text.
All I know is my great aunt did not want to leave her boyfriend. Her husband committed suicide. He was a artist and a dentist, and developed, I think it was ALS. So he essentially lost the use of his extremities over time, right?
Yeah.
And he committed suicide, and he actually had invited this other man into their home to rent their, because they had like this gorgeous freaking expensive home in San Francisco, or in Oakland rather, and he'd invited this guy to rent it, but he had essentially, I guess he had been planning, okay, if I get this, I'm getting sicker, and I'm planning on, dying within the next couple of years when I can no longer paint and all of that. And so he set up this relationship between his wife and this other man. So she would not be alone after he was gone. Right? And then she was, 5-6 years into this relationship, because they just, she was just like, well, I'm not necessarily happy with this, but with the palimony laws in California being what they are, I can't afford to leave him.
Jeez. Now, the case that was referenced there, let's see, Michelle Triola and Lee Marvin. I got that right. Yes, Michelle Triola and Lee Marvin helped lead to the concept of palimony settlements for unmarried partners, it says. And so their marriage was based on an unwritten contract just as legitimate as a marriage certificate, according to her suit. And she went through and listed all of, like, she did the same thing women do in divorce. I'm a housekeeper, I'm a babysitter, I'm this, I'm that. Doesn't occur to them that, well, he's the supporter. He's the one who actually brings home the bacon. And all of that she does at home, she would be doing whether she was married or not. But she'd also have to have a job on the side if she'd never gotten married. And a lot of women, when they get divorced, when they leave a guy and they ask for money, will actually compare themselves to hookers. I'm a companion. You should pay me for being a companion. But even though, feminists
I'm just going to reiterate, and you can go and watch some of Terrence's earlier videos where he actually calculates the number of inches per dollar of cost to these men, right? Averaging out, sex 3 to 5 times per week, the number of thrusts per sexual encounter, thrust in, thrust out, right? So at the average dick size, let's call it 6 inches, right? 6 inches in, 6 inches out, right? Over that many thrusts, over that many sexual encounters, over that many weeks, over that many years. How much does this cost per inch of dick?
There you go.
Right? And you'd be like absolutely astounded, in terms of how much it costs some of these very, very wealthy men, right? Per inch of penis in vagina.
Well, in this case, and the court calls this a small victory, okay? To me, a small victory in court is getting, $500 for car repairs and small claims after somebody rear-ended you. The court ruled that she was entitled to $104,000 in 1979. Okay, $104,000 today. $104,000 today would, in the Dayton area, aside from the wealthy areas, it would buy a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom home with a garage and a basement and sufficient closet space for a family that was in good repair and had a decent-sized yard. Like 100. Because we were looking at houses. That's a huge amount for a house in our area now. So in 1979, if I remember right, school teachers were still making less, starting out, than $10,000 a year. In 1979, they're making something like $60K now. So that it's just for comparison, and I think the average house price in the Dayton area, or a decent house price in the Dayton area, is like $65K. So $104K for a relationship in which you were not married.
That's like
over an implied contract, right?
That's $350,000 in adjusted dollars.
Yeah, a mansion worth more than $250,000, right? You buy a mansion with that here. You would be the home that people would think, well, I can't break in there because obviously they have security, but if I could come out rich. That's the geez of Pete's, and then of course, because she won, other women went, oh, cha-ching. The case broke ground, and the attention surrounding it prompted a flood of similar cases. And the lawyer who brought the case, Mr. Mitchelson, made a killing. Gave him a lucrative career as a divorce lawyer. Established a precedent in California. So he established the palimony precedent on which Clint Eastwood was sued. And courts in Connecticut, New Jersey, and a bunch of other states adopted it. I mean, like, this was insane, and it's still affecting men today. So there you go. That there's your palimony. and the power and importance and value of the vagina, which is apparently the most valuable part of a woman. Dang it, I didn't want to go back there. I want to close that tab and go on to the next thing here.
Is that much more value than a woman's mind?
Number 3. Women have power.
Regardless of her chosen method, Alyssa Milano expects women's social influence to be a determining factor in the electorate's voting pattern, and by threat of that, in legislators' decision-making process. So much so as to get state laws repealed. Why would she have that expectation? What evidence might there be in the histories of this and other nations that might lead her to consider it a likelihood?
Lysistrata.
Exactly. Like, this is one of the feminists. Oh, we're just women. We can't do anything anything harmful. We're not responsible for anything. All of the bad laws were passed by the men. Men did this. It's men's fault you have problems. It's men's fault that you don't have custody of your kids. It's men's fault that you owe alimony and child support. It's men's fault that men don't get protected by domestic violence laws. It's men's fault that rape laws don't cover female perpetration. Because women have no power and no influence.
No power whatsoever.
Karen, we lost you. Can you say that again?
I'm here.
Okay.
I was on Twitter. Earlier. I think it was yesterday, and somebody feminist brought up yet again the idea that, oh well, the reason why women get custody of kids is because of these patriarchal norms and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, no, only a feminist could point to a woman getting exactly what she asks for in court and say that that's male oppression of women.
Oh yeah, no, women are victims of their own privilege. There we go. And like, you think about the Carolyn Norton thing, all right? Carolyn Norton was not a legislator. She wasn't an attorney. She wasn't endowed by some university with some degree in, like, social sciences. We're kind of barely existent, in a lot of ways. But she didn't have some kind of a degree in child psychology or anything like that. She wasn't anything that could have been legally considered more of an expert than any other adult who had children. And yet, what she wrote to the legislators in the UK at that time was taken as gospel. And she did have help in terms of arguing her case that it should be adopted. But her writing, essentially, of the Tender Years Doctrine, the Custody of Infants Act of, I can't remember the year, 18-something. It was clear back then. And her plain letter to the Chancellor in favor of the Custody of Infants Act was the real writing behind the Tender Years Doctrine itself. That was just taken as, oh, this woman is a mother. She knows what she's talking about. And therefore we have to listen to her because she's a woman. So she knows. If a guy had started making a bunch of arguments like that people of his particular demographic, men or men from a certain area or whatever, just automatically by virtue of nature and God know more than everybody else about something that important, child rearing, enough to separate children from one of their parents on behalf of the other parent, at the behest of the other parent. There'd have been, where's your expertise? On what authority are you saying this? Can you give us some evidence? But no such thing was done with her case.
Yeah, no, and it's you just have to look at how all of the demands have been received, right? And they weren't always granted the same afternoon that women made them, right? There was some pushback, right? But a lot of the pushback was from other women. And on top of that, when I look at, say, the difference between the suffragettes and the Chartists, right, in the response of the government to the agitation and the advocacy, right? So the Chartists in Britain were active between the 1830s and the 1860s, late 1860s. And they wanted broad electoral reforms, including not just male universal suffrage, but they also wanted to get rid of rotten boroughs. Rotten boroughs, something in the UK where you would like literally have a riding or a constituency that had like 16 people living in it, and that riding got an MP, right? So, and then you'd have a city of like 15,000, and they got an MP, right? So you literally had some boroughs that had almost no people living in them that had a member of parliament representing their interests, and that member of parliament had just say as a member of parliament representing a city of 10 or 11,000 people, right? So they wanted to do away with that. They wanted to get it to instantiate a secret ballot so that employers and others would not be able to hold people's votes hostage, right? Without a secret ballot, your employer could say, if you don't vote the way I want you to vote, you're going to be fired. Or you could have people waiting outside the voting booth with baseball bats, waiting to beat you up for voting the way that they didn't want, right? And they also wanted members of parliament to be paid, right? They wanted members of parliament to be paid an annual salary, because so long as the position was unpaid, only the idle wealthy would be able to actually, right? So they wanted a whole broad spectrum of electoral reforms, right? And what were they told? They brought petitions 3 times to Parliament. Each petition had more than 1 million demanding these reforms. And all 3 times they were told to fuck off. Sometimes with open crowd of people, right? 200 people were shot the last time they brought a petition to Parliament to demand these things. Benjamin Disraeli essentially said, okay, so we're gonna compromise, right? And okay, once we're done trying these men, these leaders of this movement, for treason and sedition, and we're done sentencing them to death and exile to Tasmania, right? Or life in prison, right? Once we're done that, okay, we'll make a compromise and we'll relax the property restrictions on the vote. Okay, but heaven forfend, and I can guarantee you all, I assure you, because it will be the worst thing ever, right? That's what the Prime Minister said at that time, after he allowed the military 100,000 special constables conscripted into service to control the crowd. The 3rd time they brought a petition, right? And 10,000 military, all opened fire on the crowd, right? 200 people shot and killed, and then dozens prosecuted for treason and sedition, capital offenses. Okay, and that was in the 1860s. Right, and then you had the suffragette bombers starting in the early 1900s and 1910s, right? Lacing letterboxes with acid, firebombing museums and train stations, throwing acid on people, throwing a hatchet at the Prime Minister and accidentally they missed the prime minister. They took a piece off of the Irish minister's ear. Assassination attempts, all of that, right? None of them were sentenced to life in prison. None of them were sentenced to hang. None of them were
even a plot
exiled
to kill one of the MPs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, like they tried to push him off of a freaking cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you had mysterious substances being sent in the mail to members of parliament, all kinds of fucked up shit, right? The letterboxes, lacing letterboxes with acid, that would have like endangered just ordinary people. Same with bombing train stations and setting fire to museums, right? Like all of these terrorist acts, right? And not one of these suffragettes was tried for treason, was tried for sedition. None of them were sentenced to life in prison, let alone execution. None of them were exiled to Tasmania. In fact, right, when they didn't get their way, when they were imprisoned for their crimes, which was domestic terrorism, when they were imprisoned for that, they demanded to be considered prisoners, therefore worthy of asylum by foreign governments, right? And when the judge refused to allow that allow them to be designated as political prisoners, they went on a hunger strike and were force-fed like every other fucking inmate at the time would have been when going on a hunger strike. In fact, I know of men in the United States who went on hunger strikes because they were in prison for non-payment of alimony, seen their children in years, right? And they went on a hunger strike and they were force-fed in the early 1900s. But these women, they were force-fed, and there was such an uproar in the media at the cruel and inhuman treatment of these female prisoners that they were all released early. They were just let off. Now, when you look at that, when you look at the entire scope of the thing, right, that you literally had a government that was willing to gun down presenting petitions, right, and prosecute their leaders for treason, for capital offenses, right, for peacefully bringing a petition to Parliament, and then still say, no, we're not going to give you what you want, and then, in 1910, 8 suffragettes were force-fed when they went on a hunger strike in their specially built wing of the prison that had hot and cold running water, because they were ladies of delicate sensibility, and so they built a wing of the prison specifically for them, because they had this whole suffragette domestic terrorism problem on their hands. And then, force-feeding is cruel and unusual punishment. Let's just release them, and 10 years later give them the fucking universal suffrage. What? What? These are these women, these are the ones who face push.
Yep. No power and no influence, right? And, of course, they went through just far worse things, right, than anybody else that ever fought for their voting rights.
And it was all those whole men. It was all those whole men depriving women of the vote for no reason whatsoever. It had nothing to do with the fact that in 1910, 2/3 of British women not only didn't want the vote, but strenuously objected to having it imposed upon.
And the dumb thing is, now in the UK, there was a short time when the wording of the law had been changed, basically, and that was why women didn't have the vote. But prior to, and when the wording of the law was changed, it was changed to increase the number of people who could vote, to widen the scope of voters. It's the one you were just referring to, and they used the word men instead of citizen for that one. Prior to that, women did vote. Just not all of them. Women who met the same criteria men had to meet in order to have voting rights, including paying a poll tax, could vote. And the article that I found that was about the finding basically of old documents that showed that demonstrated that. That document showed that one woman had voted like 4 times. You could vote more than once as long as you could pay the fee. So not only were there men who could not vote, there were women who had more than one vote if they were wealthy landowners. And this is something, men who might be drafted and sent to war, men who would be subject because they were poor to the poor laws, which by that time had created mandatory labor for people who were unemployed. So essentially, if you didn't have a job, you became a slave to the government, a wage slave to the government. England's poor laws were fascinating. A lot of today's welfare reform actually mirrors them. If you go on welfare in the United States today and you do not have a job, the government will force you to work as a, quote, volunteer, which if you're forced to do it, you're not a volunteer, obviously, for places like Goodwill and churches and stuff like that. So you become a wage slave to the government. Essentially, you're working for the equivalent of under $3 an hour worth of welfare benefits. And like some people will get more. Women with a bunch of children can get, as much as somebody who has a cushy office job with a college education. But it's the same kind of thing. And women were not exempt from that, by the way. But women were protected in other ways. If a woman had a baby, they would track down a family member to pay support to her. And women, when they fought for the suffragettes fought for voting rights, they weren't subject to the same accountability for their behavior that men who fought for their voting rights were. They didn't have to fight as hard, and they didn't go through the level of suffering that the men had. In the United States, it was kind of the same way. Women here punished their husbands for the government not giving them their voting rights. They punished their husbands by not paying their taxes, and then their husbands would go to jail. Women here marched in the streets. They were not as violent as the UK suffragettes, but they still engaged in some sabotage, and they also engaged in a lot of blatant racism. They objected to the voting rights being given in the 15th Amendment, the voting rights being given to black people, because the language they used was black men deciding things for white women, which white men were okay deciding things for white women, but black men were not okay. Why? Because they are black. But feminists today will talk about how normal that was and how not racist that was, and they'll make every excuse in the world, rather than acknowledge and deal with the fact that the suffragettes movement did come with overt actual. There were KKK members in the suffragette movement. Those were connected. So, and they got what they wanted. They didn't keep black people from getting the vote, but they used the fact that black people got the vote first to get their votes. And of course, women got their votes, and that protected upper-class white women's voting rights in the South, but not anybody else's. They still used poll taxes. They still used IQ tests. They still used outright intimidation tactics like coming to your house and trying to kill you or outright killing you to keep people from voting if they were not white or not upper class. And of course, the majority of people that were targeted were black people, black men, and there were ethnic groups in the United States that didn't get their voting rights until they went to war. Native Americans had to go to war. The Native American men had to go to war in order for them to be considered eligible. And Filipino men had to go to war in order for Filipinos to get their voting rights. And then the last time that was proposed, and again, I talk left wing, right wing all the time. This was a right wing proposal. When amnesty was under discussion during the Obama administration, and during the last election cycle, there were Republicans who proposed, okay, well, we can do an amnesty bill if we put into it that in order to get their voting rights and their amnesty, they have to join the military. So we would have people who come from South America illegally would be the next group that could become American citizens and become eligible voters if they risked their lives fighting for the country first. And it would have been the men. Our military is like 14% women now. And combat there's almost no women in combat positions. Even now that women are eligible for combat positions, and if there's a draft, I don't know what'll happen, because an all-male draft has been ruled unconstitutional, but it's still the law. It's not. It's still how it's written. There's no law that says we have a genderless draft.
Yeah, it needs to work its way up to SCOTUS.
Yeah. So this is one of those, like, women are exempt from all, pretty much, of the requirements that are put upon men, either directly written into law or by social expectation and historical precedent, to be able to exercise the voting franchise. Women can be taken seriously throwing a giant temper tantrum over not being given free things by the government. Women can be taken seriously calling a phenomenon that both sexes do to each other, and that both sexes experience from each other, a male perpetrated attack on female society. Feminists say that about domestic violence, and they say it about sexual violence. So, the idea of women having no power is just bullshit.
Oh, it's absolutely insane. It brings to mind that Warren Farrell, right? Men's greatest weakness is their strength, and women's greatest strength is their facade of weakness.
Yep, and it's really, that's a large part of what's wrong in our society now. A lot of the damage has been done legally. Feminists went and damseled the Congress to get the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act changed to the Gender Discriminatory Violence Against Women Act that funds fake research. And again, they went in there with the Duluth model, a description of the Duluth model, and no proof. They cited statistics, and nobody questioned their research. And of course, Congress was like, oh my gosh, we have this epidemic, we have to do this. As if FVPSA didn't exist. Passed in 1984. 10 years later, Congress forgot that law existed. Except that, they updated it with the Violence Against Women Act. So, women's power in society is... When feminists complain about there not being enough female CEOs and not enough female legislators, they're ignoring the vast majority of women's power in society. It's like they're talking about the tip of an iceberg sticking up out of the water and ignoring the fact that there's almost an entire continent underneath.
Exactly. Like still complaining about the quote-unquote wage gap when the Equal Pay Act was enacted in 1963. We are now more than 50 years into the equality that these women wanted, but they are still saying, oh no, there's some way that there's still some inequality somewhere. We just can't find any women to actually provide the evidence of it, but it's definitely happening. You just have to listen and believe us.
Yep. And listen and believe is the mantra, and it's been the mantra for decades, and the men listen, and more often than not, they believe. And that's like, that is the amount of power that is. People don't realize how much power that is.
Well, yeah, but it's not just the men that listen and believe; it's the women
the
as
women
well.
too.
And yeah, they are more susceptible to it because especially if it is a woman saying it. Well, but if it's a woman saying that, listen, you're oppressed and you have all these inequalities.
I was gonna say, if you get a conscientious woman judge and a conscientious man judge, the conscientious woman judge will call bullshit on a woman in her courtroom. The conscientious man judge feels responsible for protecting her because she's a woman.
Yeah. Yeah, because conscientious means different things to different people, especially when you are talking about genders. And if in a case where you have to then judge on situations that have to deal with men and women alike, if you're a man, yes, your chivalrous nature would lean you towards, siding towards whatever is happening with the woman, and not really listening to men, and not really, looking at things equally or just without a bias. It's not easy for men to do that. And I'm not saying that it's easy for women to do that either, but I think women are more fickle, especially when it comes to judging other women. Women are more harsh, so I think that, maybe there are some female judges out there who actually will not, just look at a woman and her situation and say, well, she's a woman, so she must need special dispensation for whatever's happening to her,
Well, and you have women have the in-group bias thing. Men have a bias toward protecting women, and so they have sort of an out-group bias.
Right.
But women know when a woman, for the most part, women will know when a woman is lying about something being a female experience. So you don't. It's easier for a woman, for instance, to use her period as an excuse to get out of something, out of responsibility for something, with a guy. Right. Guys do not. As soon as you bring that up, they're like, okay, please don't talk to me about that, because it's they don't have any say in it, and women have trained men that you can't question it and you can't criticize it and you can't say anything. So if she brings it up, you're kind of fucked. But you start doing that as a female. You start doing that as a female to a female. Unless she has experienced something like endometriosis, she's not gonna have a lot of sympathy for you.
I'm just saying that if you're a guy and you bring it up, you're also fucked.
Oh yeah.
Right? So a woman can say, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I flew." Right? And that's an excuse, right? But if a man says, "Why are you flying off drag?" he's the bad guy.
Yeah, we're for some reason you're cutting in and out a lot. But we got the gist of that. Yeah, a woman can use her period as an excuse for a tantrum, but if a man attributes a tantrum to her period, he's fucked. And it's just like, it's insane. It's really insane how easy it is for women to wield that power over a guy. And it's the same thing. I would compare it to mental illness, actually, in that people can use, I'm sorry, I did this completely irrational thing, I'm bipolar, and I was in the midst of a manic episode, and I will make up for it, and it's accepted by a lot of people, but it also gets treated as a reason to trust the individual less, because now this person can go into a manic episode and become a less trustworthy, reliable person, or actually become some sort of a threat, right? And it's understood that if you use your mental health condition as an excuse for bad behavior, every time you do it, you are telling people they can use your mental health condition as an excuse for placing limitations on your relationship with them, or your rights and privileges in their sphere of control and things like that. And it's a two-way street. The period is a unique change there. Women get that privilege of using as an excuse for bad behavior and slacking off when they're dealing with men, and to a degree even with other women. But God forbid anyone use it as to excuse limiting someone's rights and privileges, or limiting their trust for an individual, blaming an individual's behavior on it and stuff like that, because that's sexist.
Right. Well, not only do they excuse their laziness for their period, but they also excuse their aggressiveness. So you have PMS, so you feel entitled to just, shout at and just be aggressive towards anyone. No, I'm sorry. You need to learn to control your emotions, because everyone doesn't have to experience the world the way that you do. So whatever's going on in your world, the rest of us don't have to experience, so but this is how we are socialized to accept the female experience. Women go through periods, they have PMS, they are upset and emotional by the hormonal changes happening within their body. Okay, fine, but why is that something that the rest of us have to deal with? I don't use when I go through my shit, I don't use that as an excuse to be nasty towards other people. I don't demand that other people, cater to me simply because I am going through this monthly experience, whatever. I just don't. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm different. I don't know. I don't get it. Because
it used
I'm
to
not
be the
that
norm.
way.
It used to be the norm that women just did what they needed to do. There were like back in the day before the hygienic practices that we use today were widely available and everything. It was a different story. Women might separate themselves out from society if they were really messy,
Yeah.
But of course, they also didn't have the nutrition that we have now, so that was unusual. And they basically, handled it. And in some older societies, they might separate themselves out because their nutrition was different and they were going to be messy. But in most societies, it was just you suffer a little bit this week while you're working, but you keep working whatever work women do in that particular society. And it never would have occurred to me growing up. Like, it's an excuse to spend, $10 or $20 a year on ibuprofen. That's what it's an excuse for. It's an excuse that you have to spend, so many bucks a year on sanitation products. Like, I gotta buy it, just like you gotta buy toilet paper. Well, you gotta buy this stuff too, because you're gonna be messy. Okay, that's it. That's all the attention it should really get. And to have somebody be like, well, I can't do this because whatever. Like, no, unless you have a really unusual problem, no. And most of the really unusual problems have medical solutions today. So, it's not like the woman my grandmother met that had a really rare form of endometriosis where she actually had menstrual tears. That would be enough. Like, you could complain about that. If you're going through that, I understand if you sound off about it, right? But if you're just having the same thing happen to you that happens to most people, big deal. Big, fat, hairy deal. Get a pad, get some ibuprofen, and get back to work. And that's my take on it. And, it's not a take from somebody that was a lightweight. There was a reason that my kid was big when he was born. I was made to feed really well, feed the baby before birth, and you suffer for that a little bit, but it's not like having your legs cut off. It's not like having broken bones. It's not like having a herniated disc in your lower back. That really sucks. Had that, still went to work. So when women wimp out, but women can get away with that. If there was a tweet that came out on Twitter a couple of days ago about if men could get periods, they'd treat it like it was a national holiday.
Oh,
Yeah.
And
God.
I retweeted
Are
it.
you
I answered
fucking
it.
kidding me?
My answer was if men had periods, all excuses would disappear for
Yep.
complaining about the inconvenience, the discomfort, and the expense. And women would give PMS an insulting name like they did man flu, right? That's what would happen if men had periods. And there wouldn't be this national holiday crap. You wouldn't hear a damn word about periods.
Mm-mm.
But nope, being female, you have the power that you can complain about anything, and it becomes a problem for everybody. Not the complaint, but the thing you're complaining about. But on to the next one. Let's see here.
Okay.
Come on, play.
Number 2. We do not live in a rape culture. Only one question is needed here. Why would a sex strike work if we lived in a culture in which sexual violence against women is prevalent, pervasive, and normalized?
Yeah, no, this is the thing, right? Lysistrata, the ancient Greeks, right? They wrote this play about a sex strike on the part of women to convince their husbands and paramours to end the Peloponnesian War, I believe it was, right? Okay. So even back then, women withholding sex was a thing. And if women withholding sex was a thing, then women had the right of refusal. Women had the right of consent. And men were not such horrific, horrible beasts, even in ancient Greece, as to force women to copulate with them against their will. It's just like, no, that's not how normal men have ever treated their women, the women that they care about, the women that they love. Like, there's certainly circumstances during wartime. I think we all freaking understand what went on in Rwanda and the Congo and all of that stuff, where there are situations where circumstances are such that men behave in ways that they wouldn't normally, right? But men slaughtering each other is
Well, a
not
reminder,
normal male behavior.
In those
right?
countries, rape was not just used against women as an act of war. It was also used against men.
Of course.
By other men.
Of course.
And by women.
Of course, and one of the things too, right? You broaden the category to sexual violence, right? Well, okay, so when a man is castrated, then murdered, then thrown down a well, he doesn't live to fill out a survey to talk about how he was sexually victimized. It's generally the women who have been raped or sexually tortured or whatever who live to tell the tale. It's not the men who have been sexually victimized and tortured who live to tell the tale in those cases, right? But those are circumstances where people are behaving in ways that are absolutely pathological, and it's not just men who are inflicting that on women. Some of the most egregious sexual atrocities in both cases, both the case of Rwanda and of the Congo, have been perpetrated by women. So you're looking at a situation where these are people who are behaving completely out of the norm, right? The opposite of normalized, I guess you would say, right? Whereas men who live within relationships with women that they care about, the idea of withholding sex is or a sex strike on the part of women. I'm kind of blown away because Alyssa Milano seems to think that, men are these horrible, brutal, horrible, awful people who, if they can't get sex, will force women to have sex. And here she's saying withhold sex, knowing that this would put all of these women at risk of being forced to have sex against their will.
Thinking about it,
and it's
in a rape culture, would we have a word for rape?
No, we would not. We would not have a word for rape. And it's like, and that's why you see, teacher arrested in sex tryst with young student, or woman convicted of inappropriate relationship with 13-year-old boy, right? Yeah, we don't have a word for that kind of rape, do we? Right? But we certainly have a word for rape when it comes to the victimization of women by men. We certainly have a word for that. And we apply it very, very, very liberally.
That we do. In fact, to the point where and it's constantly changing, but our society is now applying it completely outside of its definition, like unrelated to its definition. It's to the point of, well, we're gonna take the standard from against her will to without her consent, and then we're gonna make consent not a factor, and in a culture
you see this.
In a culture where it was normal, in a culture where it was pervasive, in a culture where nobody cared, we would not have had those standards to begin with.
Well, in Canada, you're seeing this with Bill C-51, which passed and cleared the Senate. And I'm not sure whether it has succeeded with royal assent, which is the Queen's representative signs it into law. But Bill C-51 was described on our Department of Justice's website as being geared towards eliminating, in as much as possible, the ability of a defendant to mount an affirmative defense against sexual assault accusations. So they literally said, here's what we want to do. We want to make it impossible for a man to prove in court that he didn't rape the woman.
Yep, it's basically it's not only the opposite of pervasive and normalized. It's actually pervasive and normalized to treat men as sexual aggressors even when they're not.
Yeah, no, and we have another bill, Bill 337, that is still stalled in the Senate, and one of the purpose of this bill is to make sexual assault training mandatory for anybody who wants to ascend the bench and become a judge. Right?
Makes it sound like they're training on how to rape the defendants.
Well, we have the Canadian Judicial Council that currently offers voluntary training on sexual assault myths and how to adjudicate sexual assault trials. And a couple of years ago here in Edmonton, a defense lawyer applied to the court to have the contents of that training released to him so that he could determine whether the contents of the training might prejudice a judge against his client. And the judge who heard that application said, essentially, you haven't proven that the contents of the training is prejudicial, therefore I see no need to allow you to see it. In other words, the lawyer says, I want to look inside the box to see if contents of the box is bad. And the judge says, until and unless you can improve the contents of the box is bad, I'm not going to let you look in the box. Right? And I'm sitting here thinking, the way our judges are trained should be a matter of public record. It shouldn't even be like the fact that a lawyer had to apply to have the contents released to him is it should be a major fucking scandal, because that information should be available to every member of the public.
Exactly.
Every member of the public should know how their judges are being trained, and yet the judge in this application said, "Oh yeah, no, unless you can demonstrate that the training is harmful, I just don't feel that there's a need to allow you to see it." And I'm just like, are you like chicken and egg, cart and horses? Like what the fuck is going on here? And why is the Canadian Judicial Council keeping secret the ways that it is training our judges to adjudicate serious cases?
I mean, I think it's because they can, and this is not just in Canada. This is in America as well, and I'm sure in the UK and in every Western country. We do not educate our citizenship on the laws that govern them. So how can you expect them to realistically identify the problems that are happening within the judicial system, and then know how to go about counteracting that? How to go about.
You know what they do, because most people, right? And this is not just women, this is not just men. Most people just trust. They just trust that the government has their best interests at heart, and they hear that Bill C-51 is going to help female victims of sexual assault, and they're like, "Oh yes, we want to help female victims of sexual assault. Of course, who wouldn't want to help female victims of sexual assault?" Right? And so they just go along with it. And then they hear that, "Oh yeah, no, Judge Robin Camp was a horrible rape myth bastard," right? Who had to step down from the bench because he asked a woman why she didn't keep her legs together during a trial, and that's just code. That's a dog whistle for why couldn't you have just not been such a big old slut, when in reality he's just trying, like my editor did. And my editor, when I was writing dirty books, she actually told me that she got a submission from another author where there was a sex scene involving the grip bat, and she was like, "I'm not quite sure that I buy this. That the grip end of a baseball bat could fit inside a woman's vagina." So, what did she do? She asked her husband to penetrate her with the grip end of a baseball bat.
Okay, so...
Okay, because she was just like, she was completely incredulous. She was like, how? Right? And how could the reader believe this? And then she tells me. And then he did it, and it worked. And so it was like, okay, so this is actually possible. Okay, so I can let this scene stay in the book as is. Okay, like literally, she was just like, she was like, you have these scenes where you have a 5 tall heroine and a 6 foot tall hero, and somehow he's managing to penetrate her while her knees are over his shoulders, and you're like, that's not physically possible.
Gymnastics.
It's not. No, it's not. Even no matter how flexible a woman is, right? If she's 5 foot tall and he's 6 foot tall, right? His penis cannot be in her vagina while her legs are over his shoulders.
Not her flexibility. His flexibility.
No, doesn't work. Does not work. Does not work. Okay.
No, so but the baseball bat thing would. But anybody that's ever given birth should know that.
Yeah. Well, she's just like, it has to be believable. It has to actually be believable. right? So here we have this judge, Robin Camp, who's being told by this woman, well, okay, so he lifted me up and he put me on the bathroom counter and he pulled my skinny jeans down and then he left them around my ankle and my bottom was down in the sink. Okay. And somehow while my bottom was down, which would have been pressing my knees together, which were also held together by my skinny jeans, which were bunched up around my ankles, right? He managed to get his tongue, his anaconda of a tongue, inside my vagina, which was pressed up against the front wall of the basin at the time.
Was his name
right?
Gene Simmons?
Yeah, no.
Okay, then.
And
I don't believe her already.
His name was Alexander Wagar. But also he managed to penetrate me with my penis while my bottom was hanging down in the sink, right? And the judge is trying to figure out how the fuck the mechanics of this are working, right? Like what on earth is going on here? I have no idea how this is possible. I'm trying to visualize this, and it's just not working for me, right? Because if you're sitting in a sink basin, and the walls of the basin are pressing to begin with, right? And if you're not helping somebody to actually get access to your vagina, it's going to be pressed up against the front wall of the basin, right? So he says to her, okay, so why didn't you sink your bottom further down into the bowl? Why didn't you keep your knees together? Right? Because that's all what would have been, that's what she was describing, right? She was describing that all of this was happening while her bottom was sunk down into the basin and her knees were pressed together. Right? And he's just like trying to, and they lifted, why didn't you keep your knees? The feminists lifted that out of the transcript and raked this judge over the coals. And he had to step down from the bench, not because we don't have double jeopardy laws in Canada. The prosecution was able to get a new trial and put this poor kid on trial a second time. He was acquitted a second time, thank God. But his mother died while he was in jail awaiting his second trial, which was just wonderful. And he was not able to say goodbye to her. But here's the thing. In the transcript, the prosecutor had offered to help the judge, who had never adjudicated a sexual assault trial before, help him understand the ins and outs of sexual assault law, right? And what she said to him, she said, essentially, he said, well, I believe his story is credible. And she said, it's not enough for you to believe his story is credible. You have to believe his story is more credible than hers, right? And he had all of the other witnesses were all backed up his version of events, right? You have to believe it's more credible than hers. And he says, well, but that's the thing. I believe his story is more credible than hers. I believe him over her. And she said, well, that's not enough. You have to actually believe that his story, his version of events, is what actually happened. And he says, okay, so, but then I have to apply the error of reality. He says, well, why? He says, well, why? And she says, well, because we can't know what went on because there were no tertiary witnesses, right? So it's just his word against hers. And it happened behind closed doors. And behind closed doors, you have to accept that she didn't consent. And he's just like, but then I have to apply the error of reality test. And I have to say to myself, is there no universe in which a young would agree to have sex in a bathroom with the defendant? And I can't say that because there's an air of reality to it, right? And she was literally like, no, you have to essentially assume that no woman in any universe in existence would consent to sex under these circumstances. In order for you to, you have to assume that every single woman would consent to sex under these circumstances in order to acquit the defendant. So essentially, she advised the judge that the burden of proof was reversed, that the defendant had to prove his innocence beyond a reasonable doubt in order to justify an acquittal. And he's the one who had to step down from the bench. She still has a job.
It's insane. And the idea that in our society we can continually turn around and call that an attack on women and pretend that women are subject to constant fear and threat of sexual violence from men in a state that won't do anything about it. Like with news like that coming out all the time, with news of men who get beaten to death by their neighbors because some woman pointed and said he raped me, or even just he threatened to rape me. That calling that a rape culture is insane.
The whole Carl Benjamin thing. Like, I'm literally listening to a.
Oh yeah, threatening not to rape someone is a rape threat.
Wosley, okay, a YouTuber who I used to like, then I guess he got some social justice pussy and went completely the other way. At least that's the scuttlebutt. And kind of like David Sherritt. But essentially, he's saying, right, to Sargon of Akkad, right, but you joked about rape. End of story, period. Like, no other explanation needed. You joked about rape. You joked about rape. And I'm like, people joke about murder all the time. I threaten my man all the frickin' time. I threaten to murder my dogs. Right? I threaten to murder people all the time. Is like, okay, so is it like, what if I threatened, when my man annoys me, I'm gonna peg you against your will tonight. Is that suddenly impermissible? There's a sexual element to it? I don't get it. I do not get it. But it's rape. But it's rape. Well, you know what? You know what that tells me, right? That Jess Phillips can joke, right? That if Jeremy Corbyn hurts the Labour Party, I won't knife him in the back. I'll knife him in the front. In the middle of a fucking knife crime episode. Okay, by the way, right? And she's just like, oh, it was a metaphor. Oh, it was a metaphor, right? Carl Benjamin says some fucking yob on YouTube from Swindon, right? Tweets at her, Jess, I wouldn't even rape you, right? And the entire fucking United Kingdom comes crashing down on his head. How the fuck do we live in a rape culture? A culture that normalizes, condones, and endorses male violent women, right? When that is the thing that everybody fucking jumps on, that everybody can agree is like beyond the fucking pale. That Nigel Farage can say, oh, it's absolutely vile.
Right. Even as he labeled it as an anti-rape threat.
That tweet should exclude him from the opportunity for standing for public office, for standing for election. He should be excluded based on that tweet. A tweet. I wouldn't even rape you.
Well, if that's the standard that we're going to hold all of our politicians to, then let's do that. Fine. Let's go back to every single one of their Twitter history or anything that they ever said publicly let's go back and find the most inflammatory thing that they've said and call them out on that, and now that's an excuse for you to just be completely, just outcast from public life because you said something a few years ago that some people may have taken offense to. But, what does that have to do with the actual policies that we're talking about? If you want to talk about those issues, then that's one thing. But if we're talking about politics, I really don't see how some statement that was made years ago is
before the guy was even running for political office, a twinkle in his eye. Yeah, no, it's absolutely ridiculous. And the idea that, when he actually came back and said, that the media, the mainstream media, seems to take offense at my hardline stance of not even raping an MP.
Yeah.
I suppose given enough pressure, I might cave, but frankly, there's not enough beer in the world, right?
Yeah, and they don't think these things through. You have pushed him into this place where he is now having to defend himself, saying, "Yeah, no, I won't even do this to you, Jess." And okay, well, let's make a joke out of it. But even the joke is still seen as somehow that's still a threat.
That's
beyond the pale. Yeah, it's treated as beyond the pale to engage in graveyard humor on this particular topic. Like, people, when I explain this to people who oppose rape jokes, who act like rape jokes are an egregious attack on women, right? And I joke about all the time, my hobby is not dying, right? I get myself into situations or things happen that are near misses to me all the time. Monday, we were looking out our back door, like a minute before the tornado hit our building. We were looking at an F3 and we didn't even know it. And we were seconds away from getting sucked out the door. That's like my husband was with me. He wouldn't let me go out there because it was weird. But on the way up to Canada for the hearing, I was almost in a plane crash. There was another plane on the runway when the one I was on was coming in for a landing, and the pilot pulled back up at the last second, not because the tower told him to, but because he got within range to see it. And I threw up. But anyway, because that was bad. That I joke about that. I'm like, yeah, my hobby is not dying. I do it all the time. And people will laugh about it because, like, what are you supposed to do? You think about stuff like that and you lose your shit, right? You go nuts. And you can't be paranoid all the time. You can't run around thinking about all the things that could go wrong. And, you develop, there's a phobia you develop for that, right? Lightning could strike at any moment and you could be gone. And that could happen to anybody. So you think about it and you lose. But if you joke about it, you make it less scary for yourself. If you joke about it, you gain control over your reaction to it, and that is very powerful. But we're not allowed to do that with rape because rape is so taboo. And it should be obviously taboo, but it's so taboo that we cannot even try to mitigate our fear of it to the degree that we can function when it's not happening right now. And that's very, very dysfunctional. It's the opposite of a rape culture, but it's gone to the polar opposite to the degree that it's dysfunctional in a similar way that a rape culture would be dysfunctional, but in a different direction. And it's damaging. But it's definitely not what feminists accuse society of being at all. The next one and last, and we're gonna get to it because we're after the 3-hour mark here. So, and we have one left to go, and we're gonna talk about it. Is number 1, our society is not the patriarchy of feminist imagining.
How exactly would a sex strike even happen, much less be effective, in a system of social structures and practices in which men dominate, oppress, and exploit women? Who would participate, and whose sexual advances would they rebuff? Would any participants be taken seriously talking about it in public? And if they were, what would be the result in their community? How about in their homes?
This concludes the Badger Listicle. We'll finish the Badger Listicle, or the conclusion, after we discuss the patriarchy. So, Karen, the patriarchy of feminist imagining. Lauren, do you feel dominated? Either one of you controlled?
Dominated by
okay.
What exactly? No. I gain a sense of pleasure by exerting my own dominance. So the patriarchy, I don't know what that is. I don't feel anyone has any kind of dominion over me. No, I am my own being, and what I want is what I will. This whole weakness, that weak shit, it doesn't wash over me. You know, I guess it's because I'm just at the point where I'm at an age where I feel like I have accomplished enough in my life where I can say, I feel like the old person, right? You can't tell the old lady that she can't say whatever's on her mind. That's kind of how I feel right now, you know? But yeah, no, patriarchy, no, there's nobody controlling me. I am in control of my own destiny, and I challenge anyone to try to wrestle that away from me. Good luck.
Yeah, no, and I just have to say, you know, like the patriarchy of feminist imagining is the patriarchy where women are completely 100%. It's like The Handmaid's Tale, right? Yep. The Handmaid's Tale. That's what it is. And no, that's not where we're living. Actually, we're living in rather the opposite. The only people who can be legally forced to be beholden to another human being in perpetuity are men. Okay, well, yes, there are some women in pay lifetime alimony to their ex-husbands because of the mancession and the fact that, you know, women were an increasing percentage of the sole breadwinners after men were all thrown out of work back in 2008. But those laws regarding lifetime alimony, those were not supposed to apply to men, and they were never supposed to apply to men as recipients of lifetime alimony, right? Lifetime alimony, lifetime service, lifetime support for one spouse of the other, right, was always geared to supporting the woman. That's always what it has been, right? In fact, I think it was Diana Davison. She actually looked up a case from Canada back in 1900, right, where a man sued a woman breaking off an engagement, right? And this was a common practice back then. When a man broke off an engagement, it was such a common practice when a man broke off an engagement that they would sue him for damages, that it became a criminal racket called the heart balm racket in the United States, where you would actually have women who would go and they would essentially seduce a man into marriage, right? They would get engaged, and then she would completely turn around in terms of her personality and her behavior, and he would break off the engagement, and she would be able to sue him and get a settlement, right? And these women who were in this racket would do it over and over and over and over again, right? Get engaged, then change their behavior so that the guy breaks off the engagement, so that she can sue, so that she can get a settlement or a court payout, right? And so there was a man in Canada who actually was engaged to a wealthy woman, And she broke off the engagement, and he tried to sue her based on those laws. And the court told him that men are not expected to financially gain through marriage. That's women's role, is financially gaining through marriage, and he should have no expectation of being financially compensated. Now marriage is not going to happen.
So it pretty much laid out that marriage can be a completely mercenary thing for a woman, that she marries for money, not for love, not for caring about the guy at all, but because he's going to support her.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you had like all through the patriarchy, right? When you look at what patriarchy set up, right? They set up something called coverture, right? Coverture was a system of benefits and obligations, entitlements between men and women within the covenant of marriage, right? So each party had benefits, each party had entitlements, each party had obligations, each party had advantages and disadvantages, right? And so you look at that and you think, okay, so women, even in the 1400s had the ability to apply to an ecclesiastical court to get security of peace against an abusive husband, right? That there were ways that women could pursue their husbands for mismanaging the property that the woman brought into the marriage, right? The property of the woman was subsumed under the rubric of the husband, but he still had a responsibility to maintain her to the best of his ability, in terms of that lifestyle that he enjoyed. So he was not permitted to dress himself in silk and dress her in sackcloth, right? All of these things, right? And she had legal redress that she could bring to bear against that, right? If he abandoned the family, right, she could then, if he completely abandoned the family, she could then apply to the court custody of the children and custody of the family home and all of the not custody of the family home, but administratorship, I guess, over the family property in order to be able to support the kids, right? She was able to emancipate herself. A husband who abandoned her might even be imprisoned for doing so. Right? So, I mean, there were all of these protections built in. Now look at what feminist jurisprudence does, right? Feminist jurisprudence gives women all of it, but does not give men any kind of special entitlements, protections, or privileges, right? That would allow them to, I don't know, get out from under the thumb of a partner, to get out from under the thumb of a vindictive woman falsely crying rape, right? It's essentially patriarchy was responsible. Patriarchy was fair to both men and women. Patriarchy took both men's and women's experiences, vulnerabilities into account, and at least tried to put a balance between men and women, so that men they had more authority, but they were held more accountable. Women had less authority, they were held less accountable, and they had an entitlement to the support of men, right? We don't see anything like that under feminist. In fact, when you actually look at those two bills that Rick Scott in Florida vetoed at the behest of the National Organization for Women, the alimony reform bills, right, that would eliminate lifetime alimony. The only reason those bills were actually tabled was because an increasing number of women were finding themselves having to pay lifetime alimony to ex, right? And so essentially, wow, women are being treated the way men have always been treated. That's not fair.
Yep, that's when feminists want to change the laws.
And then the National Organization for Women said, well, okay, we're not above throwing a few women under the bus to protect the interests of most women. And, female recipients of lifetime alimony still outnumber female payers of lifetime alimony 100 to 1. So I'm sorry, ladies. You're just going to have to wait.
Exactly. We not only do we not live in the patriarchy of feminist imagining, but feminists actually have enough power and enough stake in keeping things the way they are and maintaining gender roles the way they are, that they'll do it to the detriment of the very people that they're claiming to try to protect. So there's our patriarchy. Anything else to add on the complete lack of a patriarchy in today's society? Either one of you, before I go on to the super chats?
Go ahead.
All right. So we have a handful of super chats, and then we will be ending the show. This is a good long sausage. I really didn't expect this one to go as long, but I think we got a lot of good points in, so it's good that it did.
I have to ask again, did we get through the listicle this time?
This was the end of the listicle. In fact, I will play the part that I didn't play before here. Oops, let's get back up to the opener there.
Buff. Would any participants be taken seriously talking about it in public? And if they were,
this is the
what
end.
would be the result in their community? How about in their homes?
This concludes the Badger Listicle. We hope it has cleared up a few things even victim identitarians have difficulty grasping. Unfortunately, I'm afraid we don't have reaction emojis for you to click to inform us of your thoughts on the ideas herein. You'll have to let us know in the comments instead. And there we go. Of course, for anybody who hasn't inflicted upon themselves the horror that are BuzzFeed listicles, that's like they have a comment section, but they always have this this big thing of emojis that you're supposed to click on to decide to tell them what you think of the listicle. So that was my reference to that. Yeah, and Neat Scholar, you didn't think your own 10-minute video would keep you guys talking for more than 6 hours? To be fair, it's us that keeps us talking for more than 6 hours. On to the Super Chats. Ben gave us $10 clear back at the very first hour, the end of the very first hour, and says, "Hi, ladies, I figured out," or the beginning, actually. This was 6:53 p.m., so this is before the show started. "Figured out I could listen to this while at work. Score! Plus, I got paid today, so here's some shekels." Thank you very much, Ben. Hopefully you got a lot of enjoyment out of the 3.5-hour sausage. Mitch Lopez gave us $9.99 and said, "If it's 50-50, there should be no child support from either parent, nor should paternity tests be dependent on the mother's approval." And that's absolutely right. Like, if there's 50-50 shared parenting, it should make it easier for both parents to work and earn what they need in order to support their own individual households, including the child during the time the child is with that parent. So why would they need child support? Women are equal to men, right? If women are equal to men, then women should be equally able to support a household. And obviously, whether or not you are the parent of your child should be between you and the doctor and the state, and if the state's going to be involved in child support, personally, I don't even think the state should be involved in that. So it's basically between you and your family physician. But if they're going to use designation of parental status as a means to extort money, then by golly, you should have the right to prove whether it's correct or not. Luga Wanshu gave us $10 and says, oh, no, I skipped. French Honey Badger gave us $5 and says it doesn't matter that the money is earmarked for the child because the child money allows her to buy whatever she wants with what she has already. And that's the other thing. In a household where you have both the husband and the wife and the children, and nobody is paying you anything, it's just you guys earn your money and you spend it on your family, that money gets budgeted to support the family. and you don't have a bunch of extra spending cash for things. And actually, and a lot of families, an expense that's unexpected can actually throw the family finances off really badly. One of the things they talk about on the news all the time is that, so many families in the United States can't take a sudden disaster. An unexpected $1,000 expense would wreck them. And, that's true. And they don't have a source of income coming in from somewhere else that would fix that. And you get a lot of women who collect child support, and that's their budget for their kids. Instead of the money, and they have jobs, the money they're earning goes to things they want to do. And they'll feel entitled to have spending money on themselves on top of the support for their family, on the dime of the ex-husband. And what they don't think about the fact that they're basically taking money out of his household for their personal expenses and calling it child support. And I see that a lot. I've seen that a lot. Even when the child is being given good care. Lugo Wanshu gave us $10 and said, "Right, Laura, and I just spoke about this recently. All deadbeats should be held accountable, be it mother or father. Abolish child support. It just incentivizes bad behavior." So that was in reaction to something Lauren said earlier in the show when we were talking about child support. And that was in relation to, I think, the first point in the show. Because that was at 7:57 p.m. Tyler Preston gave us $10 and said, that all of these legitimate criticisms of child support laws will be dismissed as misogyny, like, oh, so you're saying that all women are gold diggers? They won't accept the truth. For the record, it wouldn't be the first time that I've said all women are gold diggers. Just saying. You think about it, women are encouraged to marry up. It's normal for women to plan to marry up. You're encouraged to shop around. It's normal for women to reject a guy if he doesn't have enough income. Even if a woman is willing to be a contributor to her household, she is still socially accepted as an individual who will spend her life expecting some financial support from her partner. It's not socially acceptable necessarily for men to only be willing to marry a woman who earns her own money. Like, that's considered a inappropriate standard for men. But women are expected to only be willing to marry a man who is willing to support his family. So, it's kind of hard to argue that if nothing else, it's not true that most women. It's kind of hard to argue that it's not true that most women are gold diggers. Isn't it? Mr. Roboto gave us $5 and said, "Badgers, you forget many females currently just want to do it themselves, despite having these resources that don't require lots of money." A la female, I think that's competition. And I'm not sure what that one was in reference to. I'm not sure what it was, what most women want to do themselves, because I cannot remember what point of the discussion we were in for that. So you'll have to speak up in the comments. Mr. Roboto also gave us $2 and said, "Hannah, isn't Rocky Horror in Dayton, Ohio?" They might be. All I know is right now Rainy Horror is in Dayton, Ohio. David Hopkins gave us $15 and said, "Vulgarity is the soul of twit." And if I had to write something, "I love you ladies, divide this among yourselves." Well, this goes to the channel. So Mitch Lopez gave us $4.99 and said, "Lol, you should read the tweets from LPD Lawrence, Kansas. It's the Florida of the Midwest." Oh boy. So Kansas has its own Florida man. I'm sure that they probably also have to deal with among other things. There are people who go from out of state to chase tornadoes in Kansas. And they expect the tornadoes in Kansas to be like the little F1s and 2s they get in their home states. And there are people that get killed every year in Kansas chasing tornadoes and doing stupid stuff. So I imagine the tweets probably end up reflecting some really dumb situations. Catherine Scully, my dyslexia is like going berserk right now. Sorry, guys. Catherine Scully gave us $5 Canadian, said if the state stayed out of marriage, more couples would stay married. And I think so. Crawl Dragon gave us $2 and said, you guys should do a show on relationship advice. Somebody else answered that earlier, and I think that was perfect. Every Honey Badger show ends up being relationship advice. Mitch Lopez says, yeah, people were threatening to shoot a tornado that was supposed to hit Lawrence. Oh my God. Shoot the tornado. That'll show it. Because, it won't just suck the bullet in and blow it around or anything. Oh, there it is. Altair Moat gave us $5 New Zealand and said, every show with Hannah and Alison is relationship advice, but this is Hannah and Karen. So I don't know about that.
Well, normally I don't give relationship advice because my relationships suck.
Yep.
But if you want a relationship that sucks but is bearable, take my advice.
There you go. No, the three of us, I think we make a pretty good set of relationship advisors. We have three very different perspectives, and that helps that people can see how people solve problems in three very different types of relationships.
Hannah's like mad, and I'm like, I'm in a constant state of like aggravated hostility all the time, and I managed.
That's how I interact with the world outside my home. Lauren, were you trying to speak up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we have all run the gamut from, successful to unsuccessful relationships. And, everything it affects different people differently. And, I think it's good that, we can provide, some kind of experience, some kind of way to relate to people with the things that happen to us, because it's not just us that go through these things.
Right.
These are things that repeat throughout society. Every situation is different, but I think we can all find a different way to relate to one another and say, hey, listen, yes, I dealt with that, and maybe I should have handled it a different way. Thanks for telling me how you dealt with it, so maybe I can learn from that, and maybe my future relationships can benefit from that knowledge. So I think that's the best thing that we can do is just share our experiences and so that we can learn off of each other what we did wrong. What we did right that we can benefit from.
Well, and we all have our histories of when we were all younger and dumber 20 years ago. And like we all had our dysfunctions 20 years ago. Like half the warnings I give, I'm the mom who warned you about the girl your mom warned you about, because in some ways, in a lot of ways, I used to be the girl your mom warned you about. So... And there were a lot of things that were my fault in my old relationships because I was being a dumbass, bad judge of character at the very least, and an insensitive clod at the worst. Some of it was being messed up by the medications that I had to take, but a lot of it was just me being irresponsible as a young adult. So there were things I learned that I can help with. Advise with and everything, simply because I was a child longer than I should have been. And then when I figured out I had been a child longer than I should have been, I paid attention to what I learned from that. And all of us have something like that. in our history where we've learned things through the school of self-inflicted hard knocks, right? I think everybody goes through that to a degree, but I think women are allowed to go through that to a greater degree or a worse degree, and some women never learn from it. And men need to be protected from it because women are allowed to never learn from it without consequences to themselves that men would have if men never learned from it.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate the same exact point. Women are allowed to, just be. Women are allowed to let life just wash over them, right? Like,
yeah,
things happen to me, and it's never my fault. It's just something that happened, and there was no way for me to prevent this. It's just that kind of laissez-faire, just lazy approach to life that I just really have abhorred.
Well, but that's the worst approach to life, because if you just define yourself by how things happen to you and you don't actually take some kind of responsibility, even for things that were maybe not your fault, right? So if you're the victim of a crime, right, the criminal is the one who's responsible for that. But if you allowed yourself to be vulnerable to a criminal, right, then that's on you. That doesn't mean you deserved it. It just means you could have prevented it had you been wiser, right? And when you go through life acting as if, that's the most disempowering message that anybody can ever hear. Because if you're just like a leaf adrift, sorry if you can hear my man yelling at his computer game, but if you're just a leaf adrift on the wind and at the mercy of outside forces all the time, and you have no power whatsoever, and it's not, which is the only way that you can actually say that none of what happens to you, is your fault, right? Because even, and this is gonna be controversial, even if you're like a 7-year-old who's sexually abused by a neighbor or an uncle or someone like that, you did have a choice, right? You could have told your parents. You could have told your school teacher. You could have told your school counselor. You could have told somebody, right? And if you didn't do that, right, then that's something that I think that, and this is one of the things that I get in trouble over and over and over again for. When you exercise no autonomy, when you exercise none of your own empowerment, none of your own, I guess, ability to speak for yourself, to have your own voice, to draw attention to your own suffering, to do any of that stuff, right? I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to blame you. Of course, a 7-year-old isn't going to know better. Maybe is going to believe that, that their abuser is like, well, this horrible thing is.
You're cutting in and out. But you're right.
But you're right. But that person, that 7-year-old, is always going to have to live with the fact that they didn't tell. And if they had told, maybe they wouldn't have had to go through that for months or years afterwards. In fact,
the older you get, the harder it is to live with the fact that if you had ignored the grooming, it would have stopped.
Yeah, no, and it's like if you, it is the people who, like you see, I don't know, there was this movie with Sigourney Weaver and Harry Connick Jr., right? And he was playing a serial killer, and she was playing like criminal profiler who was, or a psychologist, criminologist, who was agoraphobic. She just would not leave her. And it was because something snuck up on her without her seeing, right? She was attacked. She was, without her having coming, right? It just completely, it was like she was sitting on her sofa in her living room on a clear day and got struck by lightning through her own ceiling, right? And of course, you're never going to feel safe again after that, right? Which is why I keep on saying this feminist attitude toward victim blaming, right? The first people to blame the victim is the victim. The first person to blame the victim is their brain is biologically programmed to try to force them to lessen traumatic experience, right? If I'm walking with my kids on a game trail, right, in the middle of the woods on North Vancouver Island, and I let my 5-year-old run ahead and out of sight on the path, and then, oh my goodness, they get eaten by a cougar, right? Well, what am I going to be asking myself? Okay, what are the things that I did wrong? I should have never have let my kid out of my sight. Were there any posters posted at the head of the trail, right, that essentially said there have been cougar sightings in the area? Did I ignore those? Were there any radio reports of cougar sightings in the area, right? Were we too noisy? Were we too spread out? What did I do that I don't have again, that I can avoid doing again, that would help me avoid this happening to my next child? That's what your brain tries to make you learn when you've undergone a trauma.
And
right?
of course, there's an evolutionary reason for it. There's an evolutionary reason for it.
Yes, I'm sitting at a red light. I'm tuning my radio. The light turns green. I don't bother looking. I just hit the gas. I get T-boned by a drunk. Yes, it's the drunk driver who's at fault. He ran the red light, right? But I'm certainly going to be looking into whether I should have actually checked both ways before I proceeded through the green light, whether I should have been tuning my radio at the time, especially if my child died, in the back seat, especially if my child wasn't strapped into a car seat, right? And ended up dying, right? Like, I'm going to be looking at all of those things that added up, right, to that final thing that was the horror trauma, right? And that's what your brain is going to make you do. And that feels like blaming yourself. It feels like blaming yourself, and nobody likes to do that. Nobody likes to do that. And feminists, but the problem is that if you don't actually go through that process, you end up helpless like Sigourney Weaver in that movie, unable to leave your own home, unable to open your door more than a crack to accept a delivery, right? Because you're terrified, because everything around you is random. And you have no control over any of it, right? And in order to realize that you have some things, maybe most things, maybe not all things, but at least enough to get by, in order to realize that, you have to actually own the shit that you did that put you in a position to be vulnerable to some kind of traumatic event.
Exactly. And this is one where people have a hard time. People have a hard time separating. I can prevent this from happening again from this was my fault, and it's not necessarily saying this was my fault. It's simply saying this really sucked, and I would like to avoid it if I can, even if it wasn't my fault. And there's situations that you deal with. We, as a society, like the men of society, have worked very hard in states that get hit by, like the tornadoes I've talked about earlier in the show. In Kansas, building standards are a little different because of the tornadoes. In Florida, building standards are a little different because of hurricanes. In Texas, building standards are a little different because of hurricanes, floods, and stuff. All these things change how society organizes itself around, creating structures for people to live and work in. Because
yeah,
you don't want to die.
Does that mean that the people who lived in a house built in 1950 that wasn't built to those standards, right, and had it freaking picked up by a hurricane or like washed out by a freaking flood, right? Does that mean that they're at fault for that? No, but it means that you learn a lesson if you can. Because only through learning a lesson can you actually go forward confidently in the world with the understanding that you don't have to relive that. That's not going to happen to you again, right? Or it's unlikely to happen to you again, right? And but the problem with feminism is that they won't even allow this process that's been programmed by our evolution. It's part of our wetware, this process of self-examination and feelings that resemble self-blame, right? Women victims are not allowed to go, because if they go through that process, then that's blaming the victim.
Yep, and it's unique. With feminists, it's unique to when women have been victimized sexually or through domestic violence by a man, and then all of a sudden you're not allowed to have any kind of effort at defensive living. Basically, like you hear about defensive driving, and your insurance company expects you to be a defensive driver. In fact, if you get into an accident that was somebody else's fault, your insurance rates still go up because your insurance company expects you to exercise defensive driving and do your best to avoid getting T-boned at an intersection that you had the right of way in because you didn't notice that somebody blew a red light off and was in there when they shouldn't be. And it's a matter of a human right being ignored by feminists and the responsibilities that go along with that human right. You have an inalienable right to protect your life and your bodily autonomy. And that right comes with the responsibility for putting in the effort. It doesn't make you at fault when somebody aggresses against you. It just means that you're entitled to react to aggression or the potential for aggression in a defensive manner, as long as you're not acting aggressively against somebody that hasn't done anything to you. And you have that responsibility as well. But going on to the next one, we have Mr. Roboto gave us $2 and says, the girlfriend advice, or girlfriend experience, your thoughts, society, norms. And I'm not sure exactly if you're talking about the paid for girlfriend experience, overtly paid for girlfriend experience, or the experience where you shower a girl with gifts and she pretends you're not paying for the girlfriend experience.
Sounds like the Bunny Ranch version of a girlfriend where you pay and she treats you like she abuses you and takes your money like a regular girlfriend.
There we go. Yeah, the girlfriend experience could mean a lot of things. But
she sucks your dick, and then while you're in a state of post orgasmic bliss, she takes your credit card and says, "I'm going shoe shopping."
Oh God, I hate shoe shopping. I don't have good feet for that. In any case, and I don't like spending the money either, but I'm a skinflint. The girlfriend experience. Oh boy. So I guess that's a reference to prostitution. Now, I'm going to put this really, really bluntly. I hate that feminists act like women have the right to do what they want with their own body in every sexual situation except when they want to sell it. And I recognize that there are also male prostitutes and male sex workers of other areas like strippers and stuff like that. I think that should be people's choice. I think that it should be legalized, safety regulated if you have to, but legalized. I don't think it should be criminalized. And I think that sex workers should have control of sex work and not people that they have to pay for protection because they're doing something illegal, and therefore they can't go to the cops for help, and they can't do it out in the open, and where people will see if somebody does something unfair to them because it's illegal. That's the big problem with it. Do I think that it's the best way for somebody to live? Not necessarily. I think you really need to be, just like with any other job, you really need to be suited for it, and you need to be interested in it, passionate about it, and willing to do it. It needs to be something that you love doing for it to be a good thing for you to do it. And clearly, it's a dangerous job regardless because of the threat of sexually transmitted diseases. So it's not something that I would be like, if I was working and giving advice at a school job fair and people were saying, well, what do you think I should go into when I grow up? That would not be one of the things that, you should take a look at sex work. But that doesn't necessarily mean our government should be punishing anybody for doing it. That's stupid. It's even dumber than punishing people for putting substances into their own bodies. Like, we have the right to do, we have this supposed right to do what we want with our own bodies, but the government tells us what we can ingest, and the government tells us on what basis we may choose to interact with another human being in a sexual way. That's really dumb. That responsibility and right should be on the individual. And the only time there should be anything outside of the two people interacting, or however many people interacting in that moment, should be if it's an act of aggression against the individual rather than an agreement that they've made. Our society should leave it alone unless something was done to somebody against their will. But that's just my thoughts on it. I think that would probably protect a lot of people from being taken advantage of, rather than leave them in a situation where they can't go to anybody for help. And like I said, that doesn't mean that I think it's the greatest thing ever. Doesn't mean that I think everybody should do it. Doesn't mean that I think it should be necessarily glorified or treated like it's any more special than any other job. It's just a fact of life. It's the oldest profession for a reason, and it's not going to go away. And it's not. We shame things in our society that for which there should really be no shame. And that's one of them. Mr. Robato gave us another $2 and said the answer to this is eHarmony or some other site when we were talking about the dating thing. I don't know about that. I think the answer is being able to vet people for character without being judged for vetting people for character. And that's one of the biggest problems men have in our society is, like, women are expected to vet men for character, and then they're not held responsible if they don't do it. So I can reject, like, if I was still dating instead of being married, I could reject any guy I wanted for any reason I wanted, and the guy might complain, but society would not look at me and say, oh, there's something wrong with you. You rejected that guy. Society would get mad at him for complaining, right? But a guy who rejects a woman, a straight guy who rejects a woman, gets gay shamed, gets treated as an abusive person, gets told his standards are unacceptable and misogynistic, and that he's never going to find anybody to settle down with because his standards are too high. And our society's dating system kind of runs along that lines. I mean,
and how dare he judge a wham, right? Women are all beautiful as they are. Beauty at any size. Beauty for every personality type. Women deserve respect no matter what. Unconditional. Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna have to mute because my kid is taking my one dog out, freaking out. He's just gonna. Oh God, I should just wait for it. Wait for it. Okay. Here we go. Okay, start howling, dog. Start howling. He's just so sad. He goes for car rides without the other one, right? But he's so jealous. She goes for walks. He goes for car rides. He's so jealous when she goes for walks. And he goes for walks sometimes too without her. But he's just like, oh no, they're leaving, and they didn't take me. Hew.
Aww.
Yeah.
So he's gonna sit there. And puppy cry.
Yeah. He's pretty pathetic.
Aww.
but for what it's worth, we haven't heard them. No outbursts so far. So maybe it's working.
Well, and we're not going to. Because it's now a 4-hour sausage. It's 10:56 here. We're past all of the incarnations I got of the storm warning, and the lightning stopped a half an hour ago. So we made it.
Well, we made it. I'm actually surprised that my son actually took the dog out, because we have a level 10 smoke, like pollutant, situation here. So it's like the highest amount of smoke that you can get in an area that isn't currently under danger from wildfire. We have a wildfire in it's about a 6-hour drive north, and the winds have been blowing south. So today, all day, it was essentially twilight. No light coming in.
Sparkly vampires everywhere.
Oh yeah, no, and the air has been piss yellow.
Yeah.
And there's ash all over. Like we park cars. We have a couple of elm trees that sort of overhang our parking pad, and so the trees drop sap. Little drips of sap, tiny little drips of sap, sticky, and the ash then falling out of the air sticks to the sap. So our cars are just completely covered with ash, and that's smells like camping.
Well, this smells like the end of the show. We've got a 4-hour sausage. Alison's gonna hate me. So I wanted to thank everybody, but I wanted to get us through all the super chats because everybody contacted us to say neat and interesting things and ask questions. So hopefully we had good answers for everything. And my internet on my desktop just went out, so if you send me a super chat now, I might not see it. But that's weird. On just the desktop computer too, not the laptop. Laptop's still working. I sometimes hate my computer's 2 different Windows incarnations, and they both act very differently from each other. But thank you all for sticking out the 4-hour sausage. Thanks for listening, and thanks to my co-hosts for sticking with me through it all. Thanks to everybody that works in the background that makes HBR Talk. And thanks to the folks that are going to have to go through all of this and pick out the good parts. Night all.